The main character looks at two handsome boys and remembers that she worked part-time in a large supermarket. One day, a woman yelled at her, asking her what she was doing there and why she was looking at her with such eyes. The customer claimed that she was so young and yet treated customers so disrespectfully. And at that time, the girl thought that she had no need to argue because she wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. When the girl bent down to pick up the cookie that the customer had thrown down, she thought that she felt ill, probably because her blood pressure had dropped. At this time, the main character looked at the luxurious hall in which she was and does not understand where she is now. But when the girl looked at herself in the mirror, she still couldn't figure out who she was. She thought she looked like a middle-aged woman, maybe even a servant. The lady realized she was holding the same thing she'd picked up while working at the store. It was a small cup of cookies. At that moment, the girl wondered if she was dreaming or fainting. The girl looks at herself in the mirror and says that it's been difficult to find work lately, toiling away part-time. So she thinks that maybe she'll just wait until she wakes up. However, the main character does not understand why she is so hungry if this is a dream. The girl realizes that she needs to fill her belly first, and she wonders where the kitchen might be. Walking down the hallway, the red-haired lady encountered two boys who were saying they were hungry. And at that moment, she realized she didn't understand anything. She reflected that even if this was a dream, she felt sorry for them. Then she asked the boys if they wanted cookies. However, the boy, screaming, claims that she was recently beaten and therefore suggests that she come to her senses. The surprised girl looks at them and says it's not poisoned or anything, so she offers them a look. Then she eats the cookie herself and says it's delicious, inviting them to try it. When the boys saw the girl eat the cookie and nothing happened to her, one of the brothers decided to try one too. But when he bit into one, he thought it was very tasty. However, the second brother refuses to eat it, and the girl assures him that it really is not poisoned and first invites him to try it and then talk. After a few minutes, there were only a few cookies left in the pack, and the girl thought that she should leave some for herself. After a small snack, the boys sat on the floor and said that it was delicious and they were about to burst. At this point, the main character looked at them and smiled, thinking how quiet and sweet they were. Then she said that if they lay on the floor, their stomachs wouldn't be able to digest the food right afterward. So she suggested they get up. Hearing this, the boys were surprised and asked if she hadn't told them that the floor was their place. However, the girl does not understand what they are talking about and looks at them in surprise. The older brother stands up and, screaming, says she threw their food on the floor. The younger brother turns to the girl, calling her Eileen, and says he doesn't understand what's going on, since she usually didn't console them. The main character reflects on the memories that have flooded her head like a tsunami. The main character, Elsia, becomes a saint, and it was a story in which the main character heals men. Eileen Harlan nanny to twin princes born to a concubine who was a servant. She was the head servant who abused abandoned children and turned them into villains. The main character looked at the boys and realized that they really were abandoned twins and were the crown princes Louis and Evan. And she reflected on the fact that, obviously, each royal family had different abilities. The novel's Imperial Richard recounts how the first emperor adopted a dragon and made it his companion. Special abilities were granted to the descendants who inherited this blood, and this was incredible physical strength and a special energy, surpassing human capabilities, and sometimes even the ability to foresee. And sometimes it was even called overwhelming magical power. Because of these abilities, magic awakened within the twins when they reached 8 years of age. At the beginning of the original story, they killed Eileen and went into hiding. The main character looks at the boys and asks how old they are. They answer 7. Then, surprised, they ask what happened to the girl if she can't remember their ages. Hearing this, the girl remembers that when the twins turn 8, Eileen will be killed. And she realizes that in this damn novel, the main character isn't even there. And she thinks about how there aren't even any attractive men around her. At this point, the main character realized she had been reincarnated as a nanny who would be killed by these children. And even after her reincarnation, she couldn't have even the slightest romantic connection with the handsome man before her death. When the red-haired lady thought it all over, she said she was so unhappy. Meanwhile, the boys looked at her, confused. They thought the food had some strange effect on her. The girl reflects on the fact that the main female character dates different handsome guys, and she is just a servant at the beginning of the original story and is destined to be killed by children's hands. After a hard day, the main character informs the Geminis that she's changed their clean blankets for them. She wishes them sweet dreams too. Louis was delighted to hear this, but his brother showed no emotion at all. At this point, the main character thought that even the maid's room was better than this one. The girl looked around and saw that the room was full of dust and cobwebs. This could be because no one had cleaned it for a long time. Eileen realizes that their mother died and the emperor forgot about his children. Louis asks the girl why she's being so nice to them today. Hearing this, the girl asks what she did that was so special. Then she explains that she simply fed them cookies and brushed their teeth. The girl turns to the guys and says that from now on, she will be kind to them. Louis, delighted to hear this, asked if it was true. Then he said that he hoped tomorrow would come soon. He then said goodnight to Eileen. The girl reflects on how her heart sank when she saw the child's silent expression. She also thinks that she doesn't want to die. She also understands that if she returns to her normal life, these children will be bullied again. Suddenly, the girl saw a store in front of her and thought that she was in the supermarket again, and she returned back. The lady looked out the window and saw in the reflection that she was still Eileen Wise dressed as a servant. Suddenly, the girl saw a round toy and thought it was a ball, as it rolled away from her quickly. But then she caught it and held it in her hand, thinking it might be a kitten or a puppy, and asked about it. The main character reflects on this, wondering if she might be dreaming. After all, she doesn't understand why she's having such a useless dream. But when the girl opened her eyes, she realized she was still in the prince's room. But the children were gone, and she asked where they had gone. At this time, the lady realizes that she has no choice but to admit that she was obsessed with this novel. Suddenly, the protagonist saw cocoa in her hands, but when she opened the jar, it turned out to be chocolate. She thought it couldn't be, since it was what she'd picked up at the supermarket in her dream. And she couldn't understand how this was even possible. Elin reflects on the fact that reincarnation in the novel is also impossible. But the supermarket and reincarnation, and she understands that this may be in all dreams there are clues to all this. Suddenly, the girl heard the children screaming. At this point, the maid was holding a loaf of bread in her hands and telling the boy to jump to get it. Seeing this, Evan grabbed his brother by the jacket and told him not to. The maid asks if the princes are hungry, and the other asks why they don't try it, because she thinks they'll like it. Louis reaches out his hand but can't reach the bread and asks if they'll give it to him. However, his brother restrains him and suggests not to. The boy doesn't understand why he's acting like this and insists he's hungry. The maid claims that because Evan is so prim and proper, it will be a problem. Then she suggests that he stop being like that and learn from him. Evan slaps the maid's hand and then yells at her not to touch Louis. Seeing this, the maid became very angry and then raised her hand to hit the boy. But suddenly, the maid heard something fly off her head and then asked who it was. Seeing the girl, the maids report that they did not expect it and thought that the inspector was here. Eileen asks what they are doing. The maids explain that they were playing with the princes. Hearing this, the girl descends to the level of the princes and asks if it is true that they played with the maids. However, Evan reminds her that she said she wouldn't believe them anyway. Hearing this, the main character turns to the maid and says that they are now fired. Eileen asks if they don't know that, no matter how funny these children are, they are still part of the royal family. The girl insists that insulting the royal family is treason, and if it becomes known, they will lose their heads. Death won't be so easy after all. The main character turns to the boys and tells them she's very sorry because the maids were rude. And as the maid who should be in charge of them, she asks for forgiveness. And at that moment, the girl thought about how the children needed protectors. After all, even if she left the palace, it was obvious that a similar situation would happen again. And so it would be better to make Eileen different. The protagonist reflects on the fact that if she, as their protector, raises them to be good people, the children will have no chance of becoming villains. And therefore, she won't die a horrible death because these children grew up without love. The red-haired lady turns to the princes and asks if they'll give her a chance to be forgiven. And then she thinks about how after that, she'll be able to meet a handsome man, try hard, and live happily ever after. Meanwhile, in the Rubens palace, a silver-haired man asks how it tastes. However, the master orders him to bring a lubai. When the butler went for another dish, the gentleman smiled and said that its taste was incomparable to anything else. Seeing the gentleman on horseback, the man says he'll be ready soon and invites him to go with him. However, he demurs, saying he'll be going to the tower alone and can handle it himself. Meanwhile, the main character was cleaning the castle and reflecting on the fact that a month had passed since she became Ellen. And so, she was now actively adapting to life as a nanny, dusting with an eagle eye. The young lady has developed a daily routine and wakes up early and makes breakfast. The girl turns to the princes and tells them that dumpling soup and blueberry bagels await them for breakfast today. Hearing this, the boys are overjoyed, as it will be their first time eating this dish. The main character, working as a nanny, watched over children at play and cleaned the palace. She also often enjoyed making toast from freshly baked bread with melted chocolate. After the children had finished snacking, she would clean up again, and her day would pass unnoticed. After preparing dinner, she would put the children to bed and always tell them a bedtime story. When the workday ended, the girl reflected on the fact that housewives are truly incredible creatures, because they did a lot of things in such a short time. Every time the main character entered Eileen Tutt's room, she went crazy when she saw the chest of jewels. After all, she understood that Eileen had found a good use for the royal money. The nanny also recalls Eileen smiling because she forced the children to eat rotten pies. Or perhaps the lady was once again convinced that she was a piece of trash. However, she understood that she hadn't come here for the jewelry. Suddenly, the girls saw the essentials for a possessed person, and they were cleaning products from another world. And she never imagined it would work. The main character reflects on how, in every dream, she woke up in the middle of an empty supermarket. And she got along well with a white ball of fur named Hyangi. The red-haired lady has now discovered that she can only take one thing at a time, and only those items that fit in her hand are allowed. However, items from this world cannot be taken to the supermarket. But suddenly, the girl heard her new maid Emma calling her, who reported that she had finished washing the windows in the east wing. The maid says the cleaning tools Eileen gave her are so handy. Hearing this, the lady asks if she likes them, then says they're great, and then offers to mop the floor together. At this point, the main character thought about how Emma had looked pale when she'd kicked out those maids and brought her back from the palace personnel department. But now her face looked healthier. The maid turns to the lady and says, "It's very nice here because there's no bullying." However, the lady looks at her and asks if she's even there. After the girl's floor was washed, the maid was surprised, as she had never seen such a sparkling hallway before. And the red-haired lady explains that these cleaning products, created by experts like Dr. Sock, are truly special. At this time, a boy named Louis comes up to them and tells them that he had fun because he climbed a tree. And then the boy says that he will pick some apples for Eileen, but when they are already tasty. Hearing this, the main character thought he was so cute. Then the boy leaves them, saying he's going to practice climbing trees some more. The red-haired lady warns the boy to be careful. And at that moment, he thought he'd come there just to show off. However, the main character paused to consider that the jewel-like blonde hair was said to be a symbol of the royal family. Richard, however, couldn't understand how such a sweet child could become a villain. The girl understands that every time something like this happens, she feels offended by Eileen. Suddenly, the lady saw Evan and she asks how long he has been standing there and also wonders if he is hungry. However, the guy didn't answer and ran away. And at that time, the girl thought that she should put vegetables under her fried eggs for breakfast. Emma understands the differences between the brothers and says she thinks Evan is a little difficult. However, the main character claims the boy behaves this way because he's shy, but she assumes he's a very kind person. And at that moment, she thought about this child, who could have grown up more cheerful if Eileen hadn't bullied him. In the novel, the twins who killed Aelin escaped and went into hiding. And the house they went to hide in was the home of the main character, Elsia. However, the main character realizes that everything was fine until the twins and the heroine began living together. The real beginning was made when Kashar appeared. Vladis Le Richard, the former crown prince, was deposed from the throne due to insanity. He was also known as the Empire's Mad Dog. earning the title for his contributions to the war. He was a minor character in this world. The girl realizes that the main character saved Koshar. She remembers that he fainted due to a side effect of the medicine, and she saved him and cured him of his madness. The twins and Koshar decided to retrieve Alicia from the temple. However, to do so, they had to fight together. And so this became the novel's conflict. The main character ponders the idea of adding a male character to this mix. It becomes a chaotic story. The girl is thinking about making a new soup today and hoping the kids will like it. After all, she'll be making it in a clay pot she brought from the supermarket. But suddenly a man runs past the lady and she screams that he's a thief. Then she throws a saucepan at him, breaking it. At this point, the protagonist realizes he's snuck in through the back door. She also realizes she's awake and therefore wanted something to eat. But the nanny doesn't understand what this light is. After all, on the floor lay a man with blonde hair and dressed like an aristocrat. The girl looked at the guy and saw that he had very handsome features. And then she realized she'd never seen such a man before, and he was like a work of art. The lady realizes that with such an appearance, he certainly can't be unknown. And she wonders if there's a handsome blonde man among the important characters. However, the girl is haunted by his blonde hair, and she constantly tries to remember anything about him. And at this point, she realizes that the only blondes in Richard's empire are the royal family. The main character can't believe it and thinks that she just needs to check the eye color of the guy lying on the floor. The nanny recalls a prayer of healing among the novel's major and minor characters. Her beloved, a handsome, arrogant boy with blonde hair and red eyes, is mentioned. The lady looked at the color of his eyes and realized it was Duke Koshar. Then she cried out that it couldn't be. In the original novel, Koshar suffered from a disease called mania. The mania was driven by indiscriminate murder and destruction. However, the emperor was unaware that the mania was caused by a curse, and so Koshar was banished to the battlefield. However, to suppress his madness, he ate a poisonous fruit called a lubai. And the more he consumed it, the more side effects he experienced, including severe headaches and vomiting black blood. The main character suddenly thought about how she'd hit a patient with a clay pot, causing him pain and head pain. And then she realized how deeply ashamed she was. But she couldn't understand why he'd even come here. Suddenly, the girl realized he was dying. And then she looked at him and thought about the man who had destroyed a huge army, and she was thinking about how if he woke up, she would be shown no mercy. The nanny considers throwing the boy out. Then she takes Vozik from the supermarket and takes him into the woods. She wonders if he might think he was attacked, and she hopes the blow has caused him to lose his memory. The girl realized it was already morning and the sun was setting, but suddenly she saw a tower bearing the royal family's emblem. The main character remembers that this is the tower in which Koshar's mother Viviana was imprisoned. The emperor imprisoned his wife because she gave birth to a mad son. And every year, Koshar visited the tower where she was locked away. The nanny thought they lived close to the tower, and now she understands why the gentleman was there. And the girl remembers that today is the anniversary of her death. And at that time, when she was looking at the tower, Koshar woke up and then jumped on her and threw her to the ground and asked who she was. The girl doesn't understand when he woke up, but when she looked at his eyes, she thought that she was very scared. The main character asks, screaming, if he remembers anything, and then asks him to let her go. However, the guy does not let her go, and she explains, screaming, that she did not want to throw him away and thought that he was a thief. Hearing this, the guy was surprised and did not understand what she was talking about. However, the girl continues to say that she knows that their home is dirty, and it is still a place where people live. Koshar tells the lady to open her eyes. Hearing this, the girl opens them and, screaming, begs for help to save her. And then she thought how pitiful she looked. The gentleman turns to the girl and says she hit the thief on the head and even intended to throw away the body. Then he touches his head with his hand and says there are many ways to dispose of evidence. The gentleman noticed a bump on his head. At that moment, the girl thought she might run away. Koshar angrily asks the girl where she's going, then tells her she's dead. Hearing this, the nanny begs him not to kill her and explains that she must save the princes. However, the Duke does not understand what is being discussed, and the girl explains that she must save the Duke's younger brothers. Kosher asks if she's a servant, and the girl replies that he's right. And then she thinks she's had enough, since disputes between members of the royal family usually cause trouble. However, she still doesn't know if she'll survive. The Duke looks at the girl and asks if she's telling the truth. Then he tells her he wants to speak with those she serves and orders her to lead them there. When they arrived at the castle, the Duke asked what she had hit him with. Then the girl pointed to a clay bowl and said it was something like this. Meanwhile, the protagonist realizes she brought him here and doesn't know what to do next. She ponders the possibility that he didn't come to kill Louis and Evan. However, she doubts this, as the Empire's rabid dog won't pursue her. And the girl thought that if she hit him again, he might lose his spam. Suddenly, the main character heard boys calling her and asking what she was doing. Seeing them, she was surprised, and so were the boys. The surprised princes ask the lady who this gentleman is. At this point, the girl doesn't know what to say. Louis thought for a moment, then told his brother that it was Eileen's lover. Hearing this, the nanny thought it was the end. Meanwhile, her brother protested, crying out that Eileen was theirs. However, the girl objects and tells the boys that it's not what they think. Hearing this, Evan suggests that it might be a villain who has come to hurt them. At this point, the nanny thought that she herself didn't know. And then the boy picked up the broken pot and, screaming, said that they wouldn't let the villain go. Seeing this, Eileen suggests the boy put it down, as he might hurt his hand. And at that moment, she thought that if this didn't end, they would definitely have problems. After all, she knew that if Kosher wanted, he could kill anyone and cover it up. The main character reflects on how no one will notice the death of two forgotten princes. However, she feels very sorry for them. But suddenly, a good plan comes to mind. Eileen hugs the prince's hand and says it's all right because he's her beloved. Hearing this, the boy is surprised, and the girl tells him to relax, calling him darling. She then explains that the princes simply misunderstood. A surprised Evan asks the gentleman if he's really Eileen's lover. His brother offers to give him the broken pot so he doesn't get hurt. Eileen says Louis is a good man and offers to clean up the pot. The nanny explains that she can't help it, since he's only coming to see her. Then she turns to the gentleman and says that she's had enough for today and that they'll see each other again. A surprised Koshar asks the girl how she's portraying him now. The lady justifies herself, saying she meant for him to come inside. After all, she's about to make breakfast, so she's asking him to eat with them. At this time, the main character reflects on the fact that she cannot die now. Eileen reflects on the fact that the twins and Koshar are sitting at the same table, and she feels like she's in a comedy show. The girl turns to Emmy, the maid, and tells her she'll prepare breakfast and asks her to set the table. She also whispers in her ear to try not to leave the princes and Koshar alone. She explains that this is just in case anything happens. Louis points out that she can still be heard, so he suggests she try to speak more quietly. He also tells her to cook faster, as he wants to see how impressive it will be tomorrow. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, a girl is screaming that she's confident she'll succeed. But she wishes this gentleman would lose his memory and then everything would be okay. After all, she understands why couples beat fish after a family quarrel. Nanny thought about putting Koshar's portion in a separate pot. It wouldn't get cold, and if he had something warm to eat now, something tasty, maybe he'd calm down. At this time, sitting at the table, the boys are waiting for the dish to be served. But suddenly they see a bump on the head and ask the guy about it. What's wrong with his head? Kosher explains that someone tried to knock him out and get rid of his body. The boys are very surprised to hear this. Then Louis asks if it was Eileen who hit him, and the gentleman replies that yes. Overhearing their conversation, the nanny asks her darling when she did something like that. The prince mentions that he still has a bump on the back of his head and asks if she can see it. She replies that it's because he hasn't eaten anything. She then says that breakfast is the best medicine and asks if she's right about that. Eileen scooped some soup into a bowl and then wished her bon appetit. The twins saw the soup and excitedly declared it something new. However, the maid warned them to be careful, as the dish was still hot. The boys thanked her for the food. However, the surprised prince doesn't understand what it is and asks. The heroine explains that it's a dish from his hometown, a soup made from dried fish. The girl places a spoon in the gentleman's hand and tells him to try the soup first, before it gets cold. And then she remembers that there was a scene in the novel where he ate seafood and she thought he liked the fish. Eileen looks at the prince and worries about whether he will eat this dish or not. She also wonders whether he will like it or not. Kosher ate a little and said it wasn't bad. It was enough to ease the headache she'd given him. Hearing this, the girl thought about dried fish soup being a hangover cure, and it was so delicious it could save his life. The prince looked at the girl and asked how long it had been since they met. At that moment, she thought that Koshar had decided to play along with her. The main character muses that if he's decided to ruin everything, he'll immediately get hit over the head with a pot again. Then she reveals that they've known each other for about 3 years. Eileen doesn't understand why the conversation suddenly turned in this direction, and she feels like something is not going according to plan. A young gentleman approaches a girl and informs her that he wants to move their relationship to a more serious level. Hearing this, the lady thought he'd hit his head and gone crazy, and she felt like she was watching a morning drama. Kosher says he understands this is a rather unexpected conversation. Then he claims it's comparable to a sharp blow to the head. After all, people can go mad for a moment when they hit their head. The girl saw the gentleman stand up and ask if he was leaving. And then she thought that since he was about to leave, it seemed he had come to his senses. However, she realized she was pleased to see the handsome man. Kosher turns to the nanny and tells her she did a good job with breakfast. Then he says he should thank her and asks her to wait a bit. The young gentleman looks at the girl and says that it will not be funny at all if she runs away. At this time, Eileen thought about the pleasant but stern voice that echoed in her ears. Sitting in the carriage, Assistant Mikhail couldn't understand why his master was constantly laughing and looking pleased. And at that moment, he thought he'd completely lost his mind. However, Mikhail understands that, given that he was initially eccentric, this should not seem strange. Once a medium-sized country, Vladis began to acquire allies and they became hostile to the Richard family. Eventually, war broke out, beginning with a minor conflict. Kosher was sent to war to die like a prince written off. In reality, Vladis was in dire straits. At the age of 15, Kosher awakened the royal family's powers on the battlefield. Even scientists who had long studied these abilities concluded that such monstrous power could not exist. Vladis fell after 3 battles. The entire country then united with Richard after the king's execution. It was for this reason that Kosher was given the title Vladis. Mikhail looks at his master and realizes that his thoughts are almost impossible to read, either then or now. However, he wonders what could have happened on the anniversary of Empress Vivianne's death. Suddenly, the assistant heard the gentleman say, "Dear," and thought that he had not said this to him. Kosher reports that he's met an interesting girl, and at that moment, Mikhail realizes he's not a girl. The prince doesn't understand the smell. It's been ages since he smelled anything so pleasant. He remembers being simply attracted by the scent and then getting hit on the back of the head with a pot. The young gentleman does not understand how the girl dared to knock him out and feed on him, throwing him away, even though he had never been wounded even on the battlefield. Kosher thought she was crazy and he should have killed her when she said, "Darling." He also remembered the smell of food, thinking it was spicy and piquant, and he couldn't believe it was so delicious. After all, he felt his pain subsiding, his body calming down, and he was ready to forgive anything. The prince recalls her saying it was dried fish soup. He also reflects on the fact that alubi fruits can prevent madness, but they have poisonous properties. And at that time, the gentleman thought that if he could replace the poison with something else, he would be able to regain his sense of taste, smell, and perhaps even his fading awareness. The prince asks Mikhail if any members of the imperial family live near the tower. The assistant replies that abandoned princes live there in a cold palace. The prince orders information about their nanny and explains that he is in her debt and therefore must repay her. The next day, many gifts arrived at the cold palace. A servant reported that they brought diamond bracelets and ruby jewelry of incredible beauty. The girl also noticed many other precious gifts. The man reported that the dresses and shoes were custom made and insisted that they were the only ones she had. The girl looked at the box filled with gold coins and made of high-quality pure gold. The surprised nanny asks who sent all this, and then she hears the answer that it was Duke Koshar who did it. Meanwhile, the main character doesn't understand what the hell is going on here. Eileen thought that when Kosher left, she thought that he would forget about her. However, the next day the cold palace was filled with extravagant gifts, and at first she tried to send them back. Mikhail gave the girl a letter the Duke had written. The girl read that if she didn't want to die, she should simply graciously accept all of this. After reading the letter, she thought it was a new form of blackmail. For 3 days straight, gifts rained down. However, the nanny is considering the possibility that the Duke might demand compensation, and therefore her life could be ruined at any moment. The girl understands that if he asks for these gifts back, she will have to do so. The maid opens the door and announces that the castle is crowded again today. The boys are overjoyed to see this, and a middle-aged man announces that he is Viscount Chopin Howard, and that he has brought gifts for the princes today. A cheerful boy runs to his nanny, shows her his toy, and announces that it's all his. Seeing this, the girl tells him she'll give him something better and offers to put it back. A surprised Louis asks if he can play with it. Eileen explains that she will bring something much better tomorrow morning, and it could be, for example, a toy shark. However, the boy objects and says he wants the toy. Then he starts crying. Louis explains that he's been good and even ate eggplant, which Evan doesn't like. When the girl saw his sparkling eyes, she couldn't help but agree with him. She said he could play with it a little, but under no circumstances should he scratch the toy. Louis was very happy when he heard this and then began to play with it, because it was the first time in his life that he had such a beautiful toy. Eileen asks the Viscount how much the carriage he gave to the prince costs. The man replies that it's 95 silver coins. Upon hearing this, the girl thinks she could live on that money for 2 months and have everything she wants. After all, she understands that it's too expensive. The protagonist ponders the idea of giving the Viscount the jewels Eileen collected. Then she hands him the bag, telling him they're hers, not the Duke's gifts. She asks the Viscount if he understands what she means. The girl thought about returning everything Kosher had given her. Then she asked the maid Emma if she would take care of the gifts. The maid says she can certainly help carry them. However, the girl assures her not to take her eyes off them. Suddenly, the main character felt someone tugging at her skirt, and she saw Evan offering to look at him. At this point, the main character thought that this was the first time Evan had spoken to her. Then the girl asked what he was doing here. The little prince asked the lady if she has any problems with the Duke. Hearing this, the nanny was surprised and then asked how he knew that the man who came then was the Duke. Evan explains that Emma was blabbering about it back then and says that all the gifts that are showering them are from him. The boy says he knows the only member of the imperial family with red eyes is the Duke. Hearing this, the girl realizes the boy must have been surprised by Koshar's sudden visit. Eileen turns to the boy and tells him not to worry too much, as this prince won't lay a finger on them. However, the boy assures her that's not what he's talking about, as he thinks she's acting a little strange. The main character was surprised to hear this and asked if he was worried about her. And at that moment, she thought it was very sweet. Then the nanny hugs the boy and asks him again what he's saying. The girl says she's just glad he cares about her. However, Evan objects and says that he is not worried, and the girl, as if she does not hear him, thanks him. The prince offers to let him go, and then asks what's wrong with the Duke, because he understands that it doesn't look like they're actually dating. Eileen doesn't understand how to answer correctly and says they're not dating. But suddenly behind her, she hears the prince's voice asking her if they're dating. Seeing him, the girl was very scared, and Kosher asks why she is afraid of her lover. The surprised nanny asks what the Duke is doing there. He replies that he came to invite her on a date. The main character looked at the prince and thought that he looked so scary, but at the same time, very handsome. Kosher claims he came to ask her out on a date. However, the girl doesn't understand what that means and asks about it. However, the Duke is concerned about why she doesn't call him darling. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand what he just asked her. Suddenly, Evan invites the prince to talk. However, Kosher tells the boy not to interfere and explains that this is an adult conversation. Then he asks if he's heard that he and Eileen are a couple and have been dating for a long time. At this point, the main character, to smooth things over, suggests the prince wait a minute. She then tells the child that she'll be back soon. And then she thinks she doesn't understand why he's acting like this in front of the child. When the girl walked away, she thought that he seemed to be looking through her because he was thinking about how to start the conversation. The lady thinks that she has had enough, and at that time, she thought about how she so wanted to see the princes growing up. But suddenly, Eileen heard the prince asking her why she wasn't wearing anything. The protagonist replies that the gifts aren't for her. However, the Duke asks why not. He then says it was a reward for breakfast and reminds her that he promised to pay. The girl was surprised to hear this. The prince asked if she thought he was joking. The lady turned to the prince and offered to simply spare her life. However, he replied that it was something else, and the girl didn't understand why. The gentleman explains that the breakfast reward is a gift, while compensation for that incident is separate. Hearing this, the lady doesn't understand what he's talking about. Then he claims that, in any case, she didn't receive anything. Kosher stitches up Lee, and she's really telling the truth. Then he claims he saw one of her princes surrounded by toys. And then the girl thinks she should have hidden everything well, and she should have been more careful with him. The prince tells the girl not to worry and says he's not asking her to pay for all this. Then the guy asks if she's prepared anything tasty for him today. The nanny insists that it won't save her anyway, and the prince asks what will happen if it does. The girl confidently says that she can offer 18 dishes and suggests that they just leave it to her. Kosher tells her he likes the food she cooks and thinks he might have something else to offer her. Then he touches her hair and tells her he's interested in her, so he suggests they start with a date. Hearing this, the girl thought that one shouldn't make a lie sound so exciting. Sometime later, they arrived in the city together, and the main character was surprised to see so many cafes and shops, and even restaurants. The girl reflected on how luxurious everything in the city looked, and she realized that there were many rich people in this world. But suddenly the girl felt a little dizzy, and she could have fallen if the prince had not grabbed her. The Duke warns the girl to be careful. At that moment, the main character realizes she can feel the chest of a handsome man. The prince says it's dangerous here, so he offers the girl to take his hand and walk with him. However, the lady objects and says everything is fine. After all, she doesn't want everyone looking at them. Kosher assures her it's normal and tells the nanny not to be embarrassed. Then he takes her hand. At that moment, the lady realized he had a very large hand. As they walked through the city, the girl heard rumors that she was not a lady, but some kind of servant. And everyone looked at them in surprise because they did not understand what kind of girl was next to the Duke. The women glared at the girl, then said she was some kind of sneak and that the gentleman didn't look at all well in her presence. At that moment, the girl thought it was all a misunderstanding. Suddenly, the nanny saw a restaurant and said her throat was dry. She wondered what they served there. Then she suggested the gentleman go there quickly. When they entered the restaurant, the waiter met them and informed them that a table was already waiting for them. Then he asked where they would like to sit. The main character says she'd like to sit in the most secluded spot, preferably with the curtains closed. The waiter understands what the girl wants and asks them to follow him. Walking through the restaurant, the main character remembers that this establishment looks exactly like the Room Cafe. When they sat down at the table, the waiter offered them a menu, and the girl thought that if they had already come here, then they should order something. Kosher says he wants to try all the popular dishes, and the waiter says they'll cook them all for him. At this time, the main character was surprised because the cheapest water costs 50 silver, and she does not understand why water is so expensive. Eileen hands the menu to the waiter and tells him to just bring her a glass of water. While waiting for our order, the main character realized she was feeling incredibly awkward, and it was driving her crazy. She realized her head was spinning because she was scared to death. However, it could be because the guy was so incredibly handsome. And the lady reflects that this is her first date with a handsome man, and she still feels awkward about it. Kosher turns to the nanny and tells her not to worry, since he doesn't bite, and the girl thanks him. The Duke says that he already said that she interested him, and then asks why else would a man send gifts and invite someone on a date. Hearing this, the nanny asks if it's because she's of low birth, and he's interested in what she means by low birth. At this point, a waiter comes in and announces that they proudly offer fruit honey preserves, sugar cakes, and chestnut muffins. They also offer berry-flavored tea and Earl's tea imported from the north. Crystal fruit dishes were created by artisans from the Reuben region. Afterwards, the waiter hands the girl a glass of water and says he's brought her order. He then turns to them and says he hopes they have a good time. After the nanny has made one drink of water, she says the water looks really refreshing. Then she says it's worth 1,000,001. The young gentleman offers the girl something to eat, but she objects and says that she doesn't have that much money. Hearing this, the Duke asks if she's joking, then he claims that he's treating her, so she should just eat. The main character looked at all these goodies and agreed. And then she said that she would just enjoy it. When the nanny ate one piece of Togo's cupcake, she thought it was delicious. But something was wrong. She knew it was sweet and tasted like expensive ingredients, but something was missing. However, the main character reflects that this is because she hasn't had sweets in a long time, and therefore for her, it's even worse than a layer cake or chocolate pie. The nanny is thinking about treating the princes to cupcakes tomorrow. At this point, the prince saw the girl's intended and asked if it was bad. However, the girl assured him that it was very tasty. And then she thought, what kind of person would say it was tasty, even if they were given spoiled milk? The girl turns to the Duke and says that he should try too, and therefore he should open his mouth and say, ah. After feeding the prince, the main character thought he was truly very handsome. However, she realized she should wake up because there must be a reason why Kosher suddenly asked her out on a date. The girl considers it too strange for him to ask her out on a date when he looks like that, and she thinks she'll never be swayed by a pretty face again. Then the main character plucked up her courage and asked the Duke if he liked her, and then suggested that he be honest with her. Kosher thought for a moment, then said that, as expected, she wasn't so easily fooled by simple kindness. He then asserted that this was precisely the trait he admired in her. At this time, Eileen thought that she knew what he was like in the original novel. The Duke asks if perhaps his acting wasn't good enough. He then explains that he tried his best, but it didn't seem to work. At this point, the main character thought about him being a man who would inevitably fall in love with her. Then she insisted that if he needed anything, he should tell her quickly. After all, she needed to get home and feed the princes. The prince explains that he desires nothing more than a beloved. He explains that the Empress insists on his marriage. She desperately wants to find a woman who matches her tastes, and he believes she's very keen on it. Hearing this, the girl thought that if this was the Empress, then perhaps she was Valleno, who is the final villain of this novel. After all, she made her son heir to the throne and sent Koshar, who had lost his title, to certain death on the battlefield. However, Kosher returned as Grand Duke and won a resounding victory. The Empress wants to find a suitable partner to become her spy. The main character understands what is happening now and asks why he is looking here. Kosher explains that she did say she was his lover. However, the nanny insists it was a lie. And then she realizes that no matter how handsome he is, it's risky. Eileen reports that the prince is surrounded by many women who would like to be by his side. She also mentions that if she attracts the Empress's attention, she doesn't know what will happen to the twins. The Duke wipes the food from her lips and says he liked her food. Then he says he thinks she's funny, and her food is much better. When the girl arrived home, she thought that she was going crazy because she didn't understand why she'd been silent for so long, and then blurted out that she was a beloved cat, and for her, it was funny. The nanny doesn't understand why she continues to think about it, that he is handsome and very handsome. Eileen considers simply rejecting his proposal, and she realizes nothing good will come of it if she continues to interfere. Suddenly, the nanny saw some women coming to their palace and asked who they were, and then explained that she was a servant who was in charge of the palace and asked what was the matter. The ladies announce that they have come to see the princes. The girl then assures them that they can speak with her. The young lady announces that Lady Lehman invites the princes to dinner at the lodge. Hearing this, the nanny does not understand how she could have forgotten about it. The Eloge dinner is a special dinner held once a year. Its host, Lady Lehman, is a socialite and a leading figure in the empire's restaurant business. Each family provides special drinks and delicacies prepared according to secret recipes. In the original novel, the twins were invited to this evening, but a drunken aristocrat stabbed Evan with an ornamental knife. The main character remembers that it was not an accident. However, in order to impress Empress Valleno, who despises all members of the imperial family except the crown prince, Lady deliberately invited the prince to dinner and disguised the incident as a fight between the twins. Eileen pondered the oddity of this as the incident occurred in the spring when the princes were 8 years old. She couldn't understand why it happened 10 months earlier. She wondered if this couldn't be true, that the original story had changed because she had met Koshar. When the main character put the twins to bed that evening, she thought about how the novel said that he had lost a lot of blood. The girl understands that if she declines the lady's invitation, she will have to tell the Empress that their plan has failed. After all, she understands that Empress Valleno wants to get rid of the young princes because she fears that special abilities will awaken within them. The red-haired lady reflects on how she has destroyed many powerless members of the imperial bloodline, and the protagonist reflects on how she must protect the twins. Eileen wishes sweet dreams to Gemini and says that she will stop any nightmares that may happen in reality. Meanwhile, Kosher, sitting in his office, is examining a dossier brought to him. He reads that Eileen Harlan is the second daughter of Viscount Harlan. She came to the palace at the age of 12 and became a servant with a strong desire for power. The prince reflects on how, despite her ambitions, she seems to care for the princes. But she also strives to preserve the dignity of the imperial family, and the princes sincerely follow her. Mikhail informs the master that, no matter how much he thinks about it, this woman arouses suspicion, and he suggests that this may be the Empress's plan. Kosher asks his assistant if he wants him to tell him something interesting. Then he says the woman has no idea she's influencing his illness. The young gentleman says that if he eats her cooking, he will be able to stay sane for about a month without alubi fruits. The surprised assistant asks why he doesn't just hire her as a cook. Then he asks if he really wants to make her his lover for that reason alone. At the same time, he suggests it's all because of the Empress. Upon hearing this, the prince declares that this is enough, and he says that the food prepared by this maid brings back memories. Kosher remembers her mother, Empress Viviana, whom people considered crazy when she was alive because she pretended to be someone else and often cooked food that was undetectable. The prince reflects on how she never loved him and said she'd never borne a child. And on his 3rd birthday, she made him green soup. And that day, she only said one word. She was sorry. Having uttered just that one word, his mother never visited him again. The young master says Eileen Harlan is a strange girl who reminds him of his mother's cooking, and she can prepare a cure for his madness. And the prince realizes that instead of demanding anything, she seems to want to run away from him, and he understands that this is not how it should be. Kosher claims that he will catch her before she can realize anything and not let her escape. At this time, the main character, being in the inner palace administration, does not understand why goosebumps suddenly ran through her body. The girl realizes that today is the long-awaited payday, and she wishes it were every day. And she contemplates cutting steaks for their princes today. Suddenly, the main character heard gossip that their young lady would soon become the Grand Duchess. The women are talking among themselves about how Lady Lyman has agreed to meet their Duke Nightmare tomorrow in the Rose Garden. And it turns out that she will stay in the castle with the Duke. Hearing this, the nanny realized that tomorrow was the day Kosher needed to hear her answer. And at that moment, she realized he'd made the same appointment with 2 different women. Elaine reflects on the fact that this is unforgivable, and she hesitated. But now she is determined that she will take revenge in such a way that he will not even think about escaping. The next day, while in the Rose Garden, the young girl informs the gentleman that she, Jayana, greets him. The young lady said that she had heard that the prince was very busy and was therefore very upset, but nevertheless glad to see him. At this point, Kosher reflected on how Viscount Enders was a close ally of the Empress. However, the girl insists that up close he looks even more magnificent. The prince also considers that he has no time to waste on the girl sent by the Empress, and if she receives a rebuff now, she won't dare bother him for a while. But suddenly he heard Elaine's voice, calling him honey. She asked how he could betray her, then snuggled into his chest. The main character asks the guy if their 3-year romance will end here. She wonders if all the tender words he whispered to her were lies. At this point, the prince looked at the girl and saw his gifts on her. He then told the lady to calm down and explained that the girl was simply talking to him. However, Ellen claims that this is a lie and tells her that she can no longer trust his words. Meanwhile, Kosher doesn't understand how to make the lady believe him. Then he touches her face and tells her she's the only one for him. Then he asks if she believes him now. The main character replies that she believes him. Meanwhile, the ladies look away from them, confused as to how this girl dares to behave like this. Kosher takes off his cloak and puts it on Elaine. Then he says he'll be with her until she calms down, and therefore suggests she forget about that pumpkin-like girl. The prince asks the girl if they should go to where they agreed to meet. Mania is the illness that led to Kosher's loss of the throne. To alleviate his madness, the emperor entered into an ancient contract with Kosher. This contract would be broken if his madness subsided. This contract is like a leash, and if the emperor gives the word, Kosher will die or disappear. But if the madness wears off and the promise isn't kept, the emperor will die. At this time, the prince and Eileen came to the Imperial Room Cafe on a wealthy street. The prince turns to the girl and says that she looks beautiful and reports that he is sincerely surprised. The lady replies that it's all thanks to Emma. The gentleman, surprised, says that not only does she look good, but she's also a master at pretending. At this time, the main character thought about the fact that she attended a drama club in high school and she had the role of a tree there. The prince asks the lady if she has decided to become his lover. At this point, the girl considers that she could only be a false lover. Then he says that in exchange, she has one condition. He must become the guardian of Louis and Evan. The institution of guardianship is a system by which a child left without a family is taken under the protection of an influential noble family or a member of the imperial family until adulthood. The imperial family has already experienced similar cases. Meanwhile, the main character ponders the fact that she can't raise children on her own. After all, she considers that protecting Evan and Louis would require enormous power and strength. The lady understands that if Kosher becomes their guardian, no one will dare to mess with them. The prince listened to this, thought for a moment, and then insisted it was all because of the Empress. The girl, surprised, asked how he knew. The young master explains that she wants to kill all members of the imperial family except her firstborn. He then agrees and says he will become the guardian of her princes. However, he says he has a condition. The prince looks at the girl and tells her that she will cook for him. However, the girl wonders how long she will do this and asks. Kosher replies that until he decides not to. The main character recalls that he liked her soup and then muses that he didn't set a specific time limit. But she might just start cooking food so tasteless that he'll be tempted to refuse. The lady with red hair agrees with the gentleman and then offers to sign a contract. Kosher rings the bell, and at that moment, an assistant appears and asks if he was called. Seeing him, the girl is surprised, as she doesn't understand where he came from. The prince orders Mikhail to draw up a notarized contract. Then he tells the girl that when they need to separate, they will simply say goodbye calmly. After all, this will be the condition of separation and when one of them finds their true love. The girl ponders how to protect the princes. She cannot let Koshar fall in love with the main character. The protagonist recalls that in the original novel, the protagonist Elsia and the protagonist Mike remain together. Meanwhile, Kosher starts a war that engulfs the entire continent. However, the girl realizes that if this happens, she doesn't know what will happen to their princes. The red-haired lady ponders the need to find him a wife who isn't related to the Empress. And she must be as kind and wise as the main character. The girl reflects on the importance of not interfering with the main character's love, and she reflects on her own bright mind. Then she asks the prince if he'd like to add any more conditions. The heroine says she hopes they will work well together in the future. And the prince says he wants to ask her to take good care of him. Meanwhile, in the Empress's house, a servant begs her mistress to pardon her. However, the woman insists she wasn't whining like a wounded animal. The lady is very angry and says how he dared to mock her like that, and she does not understand how it happened. A few hours ago, the emperor asked the Empress how she could force someone on the prince when he had already met the girl. Hearing this, the lady doesn't understand what it means. The emperor says the child came to him on his own, and he says the Empress is forcing him to date the girl, even though he already has a fiancé. The emperor, crying out, asks his wife why she's acting this way. However, the lady asks him if he's heard the rumors. The lady reports what she heard, but the emperor claims that, although the duke already has a beloved, the empress is still trying to introduce him to a woman she likes. His Majesty says that the duke's beloved was in tears and they say he had to shower her with gifts to earn forgiveness. The empress says his beloved is a servant in a cold palace. The emperor claims she is the one who cares for the unfortunate princes like an angel, and that her name is Eileen Harlan. At this time, the woman screams that she does not understand why Kosher contacted her. The empress took a glass of red wine and reflected on the fact that the emperor sincerely loved the beautiful Vivian until the moment she went mad. At this point, the woman thought about how she would take this chance and do everything as she had planned. She reflected on how she had tried to kill Kosher with a spell from the Forbidden Book and blame it on Vivian. But because she had failed to cast the curse correctly, Kosher had gone mad. The empress thought it was a good thing he had lost his position as crown prince, but she was still troubled by the fact that her bloodline had not been completely broken, and she couldn't understand how the prince managed to stay sane. Her Majesty ponders the possibility that this servant may be more than just a simpleton, and she recalls what the Marchioness of Tuberos said about inviting the abandoned princes to a party at Ologa. After this, the empress smashes a glass of wine, and the maids ask if she's all right. Her Majesty asks them to bring a pen and paper. Then she announces that she must personally confront this upstart. After some time, the maid approaches the Empress and informs her that Crown Prince Valentin and the 7th Michael are asking for an audience. Valentin worriedly said he'd heard his mother was unwell. The Empress replied that he couldn't even imagine how ill these strange rumors must have made her. However, the young gentleman tells his mother not to worry and says he doesn't believe them, since it's obvious the Duke spread the rumors to discredit his mother. Hearing this, the woman smiled and turned to her son, telling him that he was her only joy. Then she turned to her youngest son and asked why he had come. Michael says he's also worried about his mother. However, the woman suggests he stop talking nonsense and help Valentin. And then she thinks that if only she hadn't given birth to him, she would look 10 years younger. The Empress reflects on the fact that His Majesty has stopped avoiding her because this son has taken all her beauty. And she realizes that Michael doesn't even have the power of a member of the imperial family. Her Majesty turns to Valentin and invites him to have tea with his mother. Hearing this, the youngest son asks how he is. The Empress claims he's useless and then ignores her youngest son. Cold Palace, a week later, Mistress Eileen peers out the window through binoculars and a maid asks what she's doing. The lady explains she's waiting for someone. When the main character saw the prince, she immediately ran to meet him. When the prince saw the girl, he said he was glad to see her. The nanny replied that she had missed him too. Kosher says that if she wanted to hug him, she should have said so. At this point, the main character thought about how she still couldn't get used to being with such a handsome man, and she realizes she should enjoy it while she can, because she can't even imagine the next time she'll hug such a handsome man. A few minutes later, the girl tells him she can let him go, saying people are looking at them. However, the prince assures her she has no need to be embarrassed, as they are a couple. At this time, the main character thought that he was more sarcastic than he was in the novel. The prince gave the girl an envelope in which it was written that he, Koshar Vladis La Richard, undertakes to be the guardian of Louis Richard and Evan Richard from the Cold Palace until they come of age. When the main character read this, she thought that the princes could now say goodbye to this troubled life. Then she thanks the master and says that it must have been difficult. The Duke turns to the lady and says that if she's pleased with everything, then he asks her to listen to his request. The girl agrees, as she's in a good mood and her brain is completely out of whack. Kosher then suggests that they all live together in his castle, and the nanny agrees. A minute later, screaming, she asks what he said. The prince says he never liked it, and that's why it was so sad to see her living with the princes in this cold palace, and then to ask her to take the children and stay in his castle. Hearing this, the main character was surprised, and at that time she thought that she had made a more than hasty conclusion. When the maids heard this, they thought they were moving in together, and then they decided to tell everyone this new gossip. The prince saw the maids had left and announced it. At this point, the heroine thought she needed to calm down, as he was clearly joking, and she reflected on the difficulty of remaining, looking rationally at his face and body. However, Kosher insists that he is serious and explains that this is a good offer for her too, and claims that the princes will be safer in his castle. Eileen thought he was right because she understood that the Empress's influence extended here. And being alone with the boys, she wouldn't be able to properly protect them. And she understood that leaving this place would make the princes much safer. The protagonist reflects on the fact that the twins still don't know they have a guardian, and she wonders if they'll be able to cope with such unexpected events. The girl realizes that Evan has been avoiding her since she met Koshar. At this point, the prince turns to the girl and tells her that she thinks too much. Then he suggests that perhaps he should have proposed marriage right away. Eileen replied that she would try to convince the princes. And then she thought about how the cold palace was filled with bad memories, and perhaps she could convince them. The girl approaches the prince and says that in exchange, he must go with them to the party at the lodge. She explains that they'll have to go there once anyway, so it would be better if they do it right away. The protagonist considers hiding behind Kosher's back and declining the invitation. But if that happens, it will be difficult for princes to enter high society before reaching adulthood. The girl also thought about how at this party they would publicly announce to everyone that he had become the children's guardian. And she thought again about how smart she was, how quickly she could formulate a plan. The surprise prince asks if this is an invitation to a date. At first, the girl objects, but then agrees, saying that it is indeed an invitation to a date. After these words, the prince felt a strange sensation, and he wanted to lean closer to the girl and kiss her even closer. Then he whispered in her ear that he would make time for this, and therefore she would have to pay him for it. To hear this, as she had thought he would kiss her. And at that moment, the surprise prince asked if she had never been kissed before. And the lady replies that she has already kissed many, many times. And at that time, he thought that she is a writer who specializes in romance novels. After these words, Kosher returns to the carriage and says that he will wait with impatience. As the carriage pulled away, the girl realized he was teasing her. She thought he was being sarcastic and remembered that he wasn't like that in the original. That evening, Louis tells Eileen he's already washed up. The nanny says Louise is a clever girl, and the boy insists that he too is an adult and will therefore have independent chores to do every day. The lady with the red hair, she asks Louis if he wants to go to a party in another castle. Hearing this, the boy is overjoyed and then asks if he and his brother can go to such a place. The main character recalls how he was so happy in the original. Then the boy announces that they will definitely go. The girl can't remember what will happen at the party. However, she understands that this time everything will definitely be different. Eileen pats the boy on the head and then asks if he likes it here. Louis replies that he likes it here very much, since he and his mother have lived here since he was born. The protagonist asks the boy if he remembers Madame Rosalie. Louis replies that, of course, he does, and then invites the girl to come with him, as he wants to tell her a secret. The boy led the main character into the room, then pulled out a bottle and revealed it was the grape juice their mother used to make for them. He then said it was no longer safe to drink, explaining that he and his brother had carefully stored it. At this time, the main character thought that if he shows her this, it means he trusts her. Louis says he remembers what his mother told him about always living brightly. He then asserts that his mother was right. The fair-haired boy informs her that Eileen has fallen in love with him too, and that in the end, it is good that he did not give up. However, the red-haired girl doesn't understand why she thought they should hate this place. After all, she understands that at least for the children, this house is filled with memories of their dead mother. Suddenly, Evan enters the room and tells him his mother was right. Louis, surprised, looks at his brother and asks what he's talking about. Evan explains that no matter how hard he tries, nothing will change. Then he reveals that Eileen wants to give them to someone else. Then he tells the nanny to leave their room. At this point, the girl thought about how he'd overheard the conversation about guardianship, and she wondered if he'd misunderstood her when she'd spoken about it with Koshar. However, the boy screamed that if she didn't see, then they would come out. The lady calms the boy down and says that she will come out right away, and then asks where they are going to go in the middle of the night. Hearing no answer, the protagonist leaves the boys' room and wishes them sweet dreams. It occurred to her that they had a back door they could use to escape, Sitting in her room, the girl reflects on how she didn't even know Evan would take it this way. She thought everything would be fine if she could convince them about the move and the guardian, and she didn't expect such a misunderstanding to arise. Eileen suddenly looked at the invitation and thought that, considering that the invitation had even been sent to her, she understood that the Empress clearly had something planned. The girl reflects on the fact that she knew Koshar was necessary to protect the princes. However, she can't get Evan's words about Eileen wanting to give the boys to someone else out of her head. And the lady constantly remembers this, and Evan's cold gaze is before her eyes. And at that moment, she thinks she was too hasty. The girl reflects on the fact that she assumed they had become a little closer. Well, when she fell asleep, she found herself in the supermarket again and saw a soft white one which she took in her arms and stroked. Afterwards, the lady says she feels like her mood has improved. Then, hugging Belyash, she says that this is pet therapy. The girl reflects on the fact that they've decided to go to a party at Olojo, and therefore she needs to prepare what she'll auction off. The highlight of the Oloje party is the charity auction. Nobles auction off food, alcohol, or special items representing their families. The proceeds from the auction are donated to the temple in the noble's name. The item that sells for the most becomes the item of the year. In the original, Eileen auctioned off Rosalie's grape juice. However, it was sold for next to nothing and divided among the sexes in front of the children. The heroine understands that this is wrong and she can't hurt their princes again. She searches the supermarket for something suitable. The girl understands that desserts suck in this world, and therefore chocolate won't be the first choice. Because she knows that almost everyone invited to the party is the Empress's close associate. Therefore, she needs to prepare something more effective. Eileen doesn't want to sugarcoat it. Suddenly, the girl sees Belyash run off somewhere, and she asks him about it, then follows him. The main character saw the one she'd been looking for, and she wonders why she hadn't thought of it herself. The girl turns to her sweet puppy and asks him how he came to bring her here. Then she hugs him and kisses him. It's then that she realizes she's found something she can auction off. The lady lets Belyash go and says that they will see him again tomorrow. At this time, the white fluffy bun ran towards the man who had been watching them all this time. The day of the party at Oloja, which brought together many guests at the castle. The main character dressed up in a beautiful dress, and the princes dressed up in their new outfits. The girl realized the party was being hosted by the Marquise, and it was being held in the Empress's banquet hall. And when she entered the main hall, she felt like prey to wild animals. It felt as if they were on the Empress's property. Louis turns to the nanny and asks what he looks like. He wonders if he's handsome. The girl replies that, of course, he is handsome and that the suit suits him. The boy smiled and said that Eileen was beautiful too, and that she was like a princess. Hearing these words, the girl thanked him. The little prince says he's been looking forward to this day and loves the way the lights twinkle. He also predicts there will be lots of delicious things to eat. Louis says he hasn't been to a place like this in a long time, and that's why his heart is pounding. At this time, the main character looked at the boys and thought that they were cute, and she should have bought them nice clothes a long time ago. Eileen turns to Louis and asks him who he thinks sent them such beautiful clothes. The surprise boy asks if this wasn't Eileen's gift. She replies that the same person who gave him the toy sent it, and the twins realize it was the nanny's boyfriend who did it all. Suddenly, the main character heard that she looked beautiful today, and when she saw the prince, she couldn't believe he was wearing a suit. However, the main character doesn't understand why she changes so much when she sees this handsome man. And when he's near her, she completely loses her mind. Kosher turns to the girl and calls her dear, and then claims that she is very beautiful today. Louis asks the nanny if his brother will be coming to the palace with them. The girl replies that he will be with them and then apologizes for not telling him in advance. The little prince says it's okay because a party requires a partner. And if he were taller, he could accompany her too. Hearing this, the main character thought that this boy had a good idea, and he was very cute. Koshar turns to the boy and says that he is a kid, and therefore the kids shouldn't worry about this. Louis insists he's not a baby, but almost a teenager, and after that, he'll be an adult. Then he says he'll marry Eileen. Hearing this, the lady with red hair does not understand why such a conversation suddenly started. The Duke says he's a child and feels like he's misunderstanding something. Then he explains that marriage is between lovers, not a nanny and her charge. At this time, the main character thought that this man was seriously competing with the child. Lewis replies that everything is fine and then claims that the Duke will marry someone else anyway. And the adults say that they are just dating, and that doesn't mean they will get married. Then he smiles and says that those are the rules. Elin looked at the twins in surprise and asked where he picked up such things. The Duke claims a little boy is speaking so rudely. Then he asks if he's talking about false love. He asserts that those who truly love stay together until the end. Kosher looked at the girl and asked if he was right. At that moment, the main character thought she should quickly answer that he was right, and then he said that this was true love. And then she thought that if she said no, he might kill her. Hearing this, Evan objects and says it's not true. Meanwhile, Eileen ponders the fact that Evan knows this relationship is fake and that Koshar will become their guardian. And she wonders if she should have told them all this. However, the lady is thinking that in order to convince Evan, she would have to tell him that she knows the future. Kosher turns to Gemini and suggests they just wait and they'll see everything for themselves. Then he turns to the girl and suggests they go. The girl recalls that in the original novel, he started a continental war because of the main character, where children were ultimately killed. Eileen thought about how to protect the boys and end this fake relationship. She needed to quickly find a new lover for Kosher. When they entered the palace, the main character heard a lot of gossip about herself. And at that moment, she thought that if she could, she would cover the children's ears. The Duke turns to the lady and asks if he should kill the hippopotamus and the goose, as well as the pig and goat nearby. He then explains that any animals who speak so indiscreetly about his beloved will pay the price. Eileen looked at the Duke and thought about how his eyes had suddenly changed, and how the handsome man had become crazy. Then she smiled and announced that it was a joke. Kosher objects, saying, "Of course not," and asks how lovers can lie to each other. The lady says she'll faint if she sees blood. The Duke says they can finish them off without her seeing. Hearing this, the girl cries out that there's no need to kill anyone and that she's against cruelty. Then she declares that peace comes first. Suddenly, the twins ask the nanny if they can play with the other children. At this point, she realizes there are many children there with their parents. She realizes the twins need friends their own age. Eileen remembers that she prepared something just in case, and everything turned out just right. Then the nanny gives the twins a box of chocolates, telling them it's a treat and offering to share with the other children. Louis smiled and said he was glad to be eating with the other kids. The nanny invited them to go and said that if anyone bothered them, they should tell her right away. The maid addresses the princes and tells them to stay together. Then she says she will watch over them. The butler announces that Empress Pia Richard has arrived at the ball. When the main character saw Her Majesty, she thought that she was scared. The lady who organized the party tells the Empress that it is an honor for her to host the party again in Olaja in the Imperial Hall. Her Majesty turns to the Marquise and says that she was looking forward to their party and then whispers something in her ear. The main character looked at them and thought about how they had just been laughing and looking at her. And at that moment, she thought that today wouldn't be boring. The Marchioness of Tuberoche turns to the nurse and asks if she is Lady Eileen Harlan. The girl replies that she is, and then thanks the Marchioness for the invitation. The Marquise smiles and says she should be grateful the nanny came. After all, she's the main topic of conversation right now, and she asks if that's true. Hearing this, the girl thought the lady had a sharp tongue. However, the Marquise wondered how Duke Vladis ended up here. Kosher explains that he couldn't send his fragile beloved alone to such a dangerous place. He then reveals that he bought the invitation from Baron Baroda because between a sword and gold, he chose the latter. At this time, the main character thought that the Marquise would never have invited Koshar. The Marchioness smiled and said that she now understood, and then asked Lady Harlan if she had brought the goods for the auction. The lady explains that the Ology auction is not a place where you can just come and show off your jewelry. Eileen says that she brought, and then points to the waiters that they brought an item for the auction. At this point, the main character thought they were trying to embarrass her, but it didn't work. Then she says that the lot she'll be auctioning is a special drink, and she removes the handkerchief from the bottles. Seeing this, the guests don't understand what it is and speculate that it might be milk, but it's a little clearer, and it doesn't resemble wine or whiskey. The red haired lady explains that this traditional spirit of a country surrounded by sea on three sides, makgeolli, is made from fermented grain. The surprised man asks how they know whether it's alcohol or just milk mixed with water. He then explains that he knows a lot about alcohol, but this is the first time he's seen something like this. Eileen explains that it's alcohol made from grain. One of the ladies says that the nanny brought cheap alcohol that even commoners wouldn't drink. The Marquis says they're all right and that they're all selling special goods symbolizing noble families. You can't display anything that hasn't been thoroughly vetted. Hearing this, the girl explains that she'll therefore hold a tasting. She even says she has paper cups for that. She then asks how it's possible to auction off a product that hasn't been personally tested. The girl then suggests everyone get in line. However, the brown-haired lady objects, asking who wants a drink like that and insisting there's no alcohol except wine. At this point, the Duke, to calm everyone down, smashed the statue. Then he motioned for everyone to freeze. The Marquise was extremely indignant when she saw the broken sapphire statue. However, the prince calmed her down and said he would make it up to her. The red-haired lady looked at him and thought about how he could break her with his bare hands. Kosher turns to Eileen and asks if he can have a glass. Then the nanny pours him one. The prince drinks it all and says it is an excellent drink. At this time, a lady with green hair comes up to them and says that she wants to try it too. The main character looked at her and thought about how foreign she was. She then remembered that, as far as she knew, only one foreign family had been invited to this party. Then she remembered that she was Princess Laksha. Figia Laksha is the second daughter of King Laksha, who owns the magical tower. She was a professor at the Richard Empire Academy. In fact, she was the head of Elvitoria and could have anything she desired. At this point, the girl thought there was nothing wrong with getting closer to her. Then she pours the drink and wishes it a pleasant taste. The main character reflects on the fact that the princess is beautiful, intelligent, and talented, and that she's also a foreigner, so she needn't worry about the Empress's opinion. And to prevent Koshar from starting a continental war, he needs a woman unrelated to the Empress, and she needs to be as intelligent and wise as the main character. At this time, the girl looked at the princess and thought that she had already found her bride, Koshara. And so that he does not start a continental war, he needs a woman who is not connected with the Empress. Figia took the glass and said that she liked the aroma, and when she drank, she threw the glass on the floor. A worried Eileen asks the princess what happened to her. However, she doesn't hear an answer and doesn't know what to do. Aristocrats say the princess drank the alcohol given to her by the nanny and lost consciousness. Others claim she poisoned the alcohol. The diplomat, screaming that this is murder and a crime of diplomatic proportions, says that she must be arrested immediately. At this time, the Empress orders the main character to be arrested. When the princess came to, she reported that the drink had a soft taste that lingered on the tip of her tongue. It was refreshing, full of flavor. It had a subtle grain aroma and was even slightly sweet. Fiji speaks with admiration that wine is not worth comparing to him. At this point, the main character breathes a sigh of relief and says she thought she was going to jail. It turns out, however, the princess was simply shocked by the drink's overly delicious taste. The princess asks the organizers to find out if she can take part in the auction. The marquise apologizes and says that it will be difficult since a foreigner has never participated in this century-old auction. At this time, Figia realizes that she will have to give up the divine drink. After her words, all the aristocrats lined up to try this incredible drink. When they tried it, they expressed their intrigue as it was incredible that such a flavor could be derived from grain, sweet, piquant, and refined. When Elaine has one bottle left, she asks the marquise if it is enough to participate in the auction. The marquise tries to contain her anger and says that enough is enough. At this time, the main character felt very satisfied because she had no idea that the aristocrats would like this drink so much. The girl understands that if it wins and is named Product of the Year, then perhaps they will be able to start producing it and selling it. Suddenly, Jana Enders, the #1 villain, showed up at the party, having passed out in the rose garden. She turns to the nanny and tells her that no matter what she does, she won't be able to win the Enders family's ruby wine. At this time, the main character realizes that the ruby berry wine made by the Enders family won the auction 4 years in a row. Eileen suddenly became curious about what this drink tasted like, realizing she'd never tried alcohol from this world before. And so that's why she was curious. Jana asks the nanny if she is ignoring her. Then she claims that their family's alcohol is the best. At this time, the main character thought that it was all thanks to Kosher that she looked so beautiful that such a beauty was staring at her. Suddenly, the lady in the lilac dress looked surprised and asked why she was approaching her. Then she wondered what she was doing. Eileen touches her lips and tells her that if she bites them, they'll bleed. She then suggests that she not ruin such a beautiful face. The main character tells Jana she wants to try the ruby wine. Since it's won 4 times in a row, it must be truly excellent. The surprised black-haired lady agrees and says she has the best wine, and that its recipe has been passed down through generations in their family. Eileen strokes the girl's face, then claims it's red. The nanny asks if the lady has a fever. Suddenly, the prince approaches them and takes Eileen's hand. The surprised lady asks when he arrived. Kosher replies that he came before she started cheating on him. Hearing this, Gianna becomes extremely angry, and when Eileen sees her, she asks if everything is okay or if she's the one with it. However, the lady doesn't answer and simply leaves. At this point, the main character remembers that she fainted in the original film, also due to her weakness. The prince turns to the nanny and says he didn't know she had any business acumen, then claims she surprised him. The girl replies that it just happened and then thought she should keep her experience conducting supermarket tastings a secret. Kashar says that he is sad because he still doesn't know a lot about her. Hearing this, the nanny smiled and explained that, in the end, they are strangers to each other. However, the young gentleman assures her that this is too much to say, insisting that they are lovers. And so he no longer wants to hear such words from her. He then embraces her and offers to console him before he suffers emotional trauma. At this point, the main character thought about how he was attacking her with that face. And she realized how poor her heart was, unable to protest his beauty. Then she agreed and suggested they go somewhere secluded. When they reached the balcony, the prince asked if this was a place of consolation. The girl informed him that she had prepared something for him to ease his sadness. Then the nanny pulls out a box and says it's a consolation prize. The prince, surprised, sees it and asks where she got it. The nanny explains that she smuggled it under her skirt, which has a wonderful petticoat, a woman's pocket. The main character opens the box and announces that it contains a potato pancake with cheese and bacon, which goes perfectly with makgeolli. At this point, the girl thought about how happy she was to find the magical lunchbox in Eileen's room, the one she used for similar purposes. The nanny realized that even the cheese remained perfect, and the crispy potato crust retained its flavor. Prince Nova asks if this is the consolation she spoke of. The nanny explains that he asked her to cook for him, and it's even stated in the contract. Eileen takes it from Yedu and tells him she made it especially for him. Then she suggests he try it before it gets cold. She feeds him with chopsticks and at the same time thinks about how he should eat quickly before the taste of fat and salty disappears from his mouth. The prince poured a glass of white liquid and then suggested they clink glasses to celebrate their successful relationship. A few minutes later, the lunchbox was empty. The prince had eaten everything, and the heroine thought he must have enjoyed the food. She knew he wasn't used to using chopsticks, but he ate well. Kosher informed him that he had made the right choice, as the food she prepared was delicious. Hearing this, the girl was overjoyed, but tried not to show it. The Duke says he's never tasted such delicious food before, crispy on the outside and savory and salty on the inside, and he really likes the meat inside. He then adds that the delicate flavor of the cheese pairs well with alcohol. Elin looked at his empty glass and then said that he described the food well, and she loves it when people praise her food. The prince looks at the girl and asks if she's afraid of him. He pours her another drink. The girl replies that she's afraid of him, but his beauty hides all her fear, and she says that a handsome man could be bad for me. However, the prince doesn't understand the connection and asks about it. The nanny replies that it's very big. Eileen says they've already eaten and drunk everything and suggests they return to the hall. But the prince suddenly stops her and asks why she didn't console him. At this point, the girl touches his forehead and remarks that his face is red and then asks if his head hurts. And at this point, she thinks she's forgotten that he's taking poison and drinking alcohol. And that's precisely what could be incompatible. The prince asks the girl if he looks ill. She objects, saying no, and then she thinks only those closest to him know he suffers from headaches. Eileen explains that headaches are so common, especially among people of their time, and then smiles. Meanwhile, she's troubled by the thought that he's in pain and that only Elsia could ease it. And the nanny realizes that he'll have to meet the main character at least once because she doesn't know if there's another way to cure his illness. Suddenly, the door is opened by an assistant, and Mikhail then apologizes and says that the Duke needs to go out for a while. Eileen tells the prince not to worry and just go. He says he's sorry. Hearing this, the girl is surprised and thinks he's sorry he'll leave her alone with the twins. The prince says he's worried someone might offend her. However, the girl objects, telling her everything is fine and urging her not to talk nonsense. And at that moment, she begins to think that something is wrong with him. The protagonist thought about his distrustful look, his strange behavior, and the impression he seemed reluctant to leave. Then, with a cry, she said, "Enough of the jokes," and told him to leave quickly. When the prince left, Mikhail paused for a moment and looked at the girl very strangely. And then she thought the assistant's face had darkened, and she also suspected he might be mistaken. When Eileen was left alone, she thought that she hadn't seen the boys for a long time, and so she decided to go and visit them. While the girl was looking for the twins, she wondered if they had found their friends yet. But suddenly she heard her maid, Emma, calling her. The nanny asks the maid what happened, and she replies that there is trouble. Emma explains that the heir of the Appleton family and the princes did not get along. At this time, the boy crushed the cookie that the prince had given him and told him not to lie, since he had no father. Hearing this, Evan objects and claims he has a father. Then the boy says that if they do have a father, he asks why they live in a cold palace. And he doesn't understand why they begged the Duke to be their guardian. After these words, Evan pounced on the boy and punched him in the face. And when he hit him, he screamed and asked him to say again that they didn't have a father. At that moment, the nanny ran up to them and told Evan to calm down. An offended Appleton said he'd tell his mom and dad everything. At this time, the Duchess runs up to them and says, surprised, why her dear boy Giovanni was beaten. The son runs up to his mother, screaming, saying he's in pain. The surprised woman asks what's going on. However, without waiting for an answer, she cries out that the nanny taught the children to fight. Hearing this, Eileen explains that the heir of House Appleton was rude to her princes. And then she remembers that the Appleton nobleman swung his sword at Evan in the original novel. Mr. Appleton insists, screaming that having children is impossible anyway, and then asks what kind of terrible upbringing she had among the princes. Suddenly, the Empress comes up to them and asks if the little princes are to blame for this. The Marquise says that the princes are still very young, and she believes that responsibility lies with the one who is closest to them. At this time, the main character thought that, apparently, the Empress herself incited Count Appleton to do this. Her parents insisted it was shameful and almost tragic. And at that moment, the girl thought that this was a difficult situation, but she somehow needed to protect the princes. Eileen turns to the Empress and tells her that Louis and Evan are also His Majesty's sons. She explains that Lord Giovanni denied this. Therefore, it is an insult to the honor of the imperial family. Father Giovanni, crying out, says that it was just a small verbal squabble between children. The Empress insists he's still a child and therefore has trouble distinguishing right from wrong. And besides, Prince Evan took aim at the Count's son. Her Majesty asks if there's a difference between a simple verbal error and an inability to control one's anger. Hearing this, Giovanni's parents cry out that what the Empress says is true and then ask her to punish this nanny properly. Her Majesty maintains that, although they say Duke Vladis has become their guardian, it is largely their nanny's fault. And therefore, she believes she bears some responsibility. After all, as the Empress mother, she had to take care of the little princes. And then she asks if all this didn't happen because she left them in the care of a nanny. The Empress turns to Madame Tuberoche and asks what she thinks about this. The Marquise says that the nanny who made mistakes in raising the princes should receive 30 lashes. A few minutes later, a knight entered the room with a stick. Seeing this, the little princes began to cry, fearing for their nanny. Eileen looked at the twins and then told Emma to take the little princes away and scream that she had done it faster. The maid almost forcibly took the princes away, where they did not want to leave. The Empress announces that since she is the Duke's beloved, she may not take off her dress. At this point, the main character realized she would be in great pain and she had only one desire: to run away right now. However, she realized that if she left, all the blame would fall on the children. The main character recalls that the contract didn't stipulate that kosher would protect her. She reflects on the fact that they did share a potato pancake and mac jolie. Eileen really wants kosher to come and save her. Suddenly, the prince enters the room and announces that he didn't expect to see blood in the Empress's palace. He then invites the girl to come to him, declaring her his bride. Seeing him, the main character was very happy and then ran up to him and hugged him. The Empress realizes that she has failed, and then she screams at the prince, asking how dare he behave in her palace. Kosher explains that he punished the insect that tried to harm his bride, and then asks if she has any problems. Her Majesty argues that the nanny made a mistake and should therefore be punished accordingly. Hearing this, the prince asserts that the punishment is not directed at him. Suddenly, His Majesty enters the room and asks what all the fuss is about. Dionysius Shire Rion Richard, the ruling emperor who loved justice very much, was the father of princes and sheep. All the nobles who saw His Majesty immediately greeted him. The Empress turns to His Majesty and says that it is a great honor for them that he has attended the Eloge party. However, the Emperor asks what is happening here, Her Majesty. The Empress explains that this was the little prince's first time attending a party. But there was a minor conflict, and it was probably all her fault, as she hadn't been paying enough attention. The Emperor turns to the Marquise and orders the hostess of the party to explain everything. The Marchioness Tuberoche explains that the prince actually started swinging his fists because of a joke made by the Count's son. His Majesty asks if this is true. The Marchioness replies that it is true, down to the last word. Hearing this, the protagonist thought about how they had seen and heard everything, but couldn't understand how they dared to lie so shamelessly. And she thought about how the emperor would side with the empress. The heroine realizes that even if she tells the truth, it will sound like a lie. Then she cuddles closer to the prince and expresses her annoyance at hearing this. At this time, the prince thought that he should just kill them all. At this time, the drunken count reports that his mistress lies well. He holds a bottle in his hand and then smiles. The surprised wife asks Marquis Gerald what nonsense he is talking about. The Marquis looks at the bottle and says that he is in a great mood. The prince looked at Gerald and thought he was crazy. At this time, the main character remembers that she was told that while she was on the secret balcony, the auction was over and this man won it. The Marquise Tuberoche suggests her dear husband come to his senses. He reports that he's knocked it all out and says he's in a good mood. Suddenly, the lady tells them to look at the amount of the winning bet. However, when you look at her face, you can understand that this amount is quite serious. The surprised Marquise reports that such a huge sum will go down in history. The butlers announce that first place belongs to Evan Richard and Louise Richard Macaulay. The final amount of the winning bid is 4,000 gold pieces. Hearing this, the main character was surprised and said that this is a huge amount of money, and it is enough to buy a small castle. At this point, the Marquise Tuberoche grabs her husband by the hair and, screaming, calls him a crazy freak. At this point, the Marquise Gerald turns to his wife and says she'll tear out all his hair and suggests leaving him. The Marquise asks her husband how many bottles of alcohol he bought and why he needs his empty head on his shoulders. A surprised Gerald asks how she knew about this. However, the Marquise doesn't answer and punches him with all her might. At this time, Eileen looked at them and thought that in her place she would have kept quiet in public view. Marquis Gerald turns to his wife and claims she said he can buy whatever he wants. Then he reports that she said she'll be busy intimidating the lousy nanny. Hearing this, the Marquise Tuberoche shuts her husband's mouth and tells him he doesn't understand what he's saying. Then she quietly whispers in his ear, "To shut up, you idiot." However, the Marquis insists he can't breathe, and he's right. The surprised emperor asks Marquis Gerald what all this means. At this time, the Empress approaches him and suggests that His Majesty not listen to the nonsense of a drunken man. However, the Emperor asserts that he will listen to the Marquis's testimony and suggests that the Empress not interfere with him in this. This is when Marquis Gerald bites his wife's hand and screams that he heard everything, and says that his wife conspired with these pigs, and then he points to the Hilton family. The Marquis claims they agreed to arrange for the nanny to be flogged, and he won't keep quiet about it as he feels it's unfair. The man reveals that he is Marquis Gerald, and if he lied, they could rip his guts out. He then screams and declares that he won't tolerate this anymore. At this time, the main character thought that the power of Makgeolli was so great, and she didn't even realize that this drink could even save her life. The emperor thought for a moment, then declared that Count Appleton and his wife would be imprisoned for insulting the imperial family, as well as the Lamans for fraud. The remaining charges would be heard in court. The surprised Marquise Tuberoche cries out and asks the Empress if she knows that this is all a misunderstanding. At this point, the Empress turns to His Majesty and informs him that she truly had no idea the Marquise would act like this. She then embraces him and asks him to calm her frightened heart. His Majesty takes the Empress by the hand and then invites them to leave this place. At this point, the main character doesn't understand what happened and thinks she almost died anyway. She understands that her drink won the auction, but she doesn't know where the emperor came from. And all these thoughts just don't add up. The prince turns to Eileen and suggests that she leave here. The main character looked at the frightened princes and invited them to come to her. Then she hugs the boys and tells them everything is fine and suggests they forget about it. Eileen informs the princes that they are the winners today, and therefore they should be in a good mood. Sitting in the carriage, the girl realizes that she has finally calmed down and can soberly assess the situation. The nanny noticed that Louis was quiet and then asked if he was okay. The boy replied that he was fine and that it was because she had protected him. At this time, the girl looked at Evan and thought that he didn't even want to look at her after this incident. Louis approaches the nanny and asks if he can ask her something, and the girl suggests asking whatever interests him. The boy asks if it is true that his brother has become their guardian. Upon hearing this, the protagonist thought she should have told him before he heard it from other people. She then replied that she had asked the Duke for this favor and that he would protect them. At this time, Evan remembers the words of the boy who said that there is a limit to the capabilities of an ordinary nanny, so he does not understand why she grovels before the Duke. Eileen reflects on how she wanted to protect them, but they overheard such things. And what's more, the emperor was indifferent to his own children. He didn't even look at them or ask them anything. The nanny turns to the boy and asks if he's very surprised. Then she apologizes for not telling him beforehand. Louis replies that nothing and says that everything is fine and then asks the nanny if she's okay. The girl replies that she feels better because he cares about her, and that makes her very happy. Hearing these words, Louis says that he can't do anything, and then he starts crying. Seeing the upset boy, Eileen screams that she is fine and therefore suggests the boy to stop crying. At this time, the prince smiles and says that it is normal that children can't do anything. Hearing this, the little master objects and says that's not true. Eileen asks the prince why he's doing this to the child. Koshar replies that it's so sweet because he's so little. However, the boy objects and says that he's still little but will soon be a grown-up. Louis tells Eileen that when he grows up, he wants to protect her. Therefore, he will never allow anyone to hurt her. At this point, Eileen thinks about how cute this boy is, and it makes her heart beat faster. The little prince turns to Eileen and tells her that something terrible almost happened. However, this makes him sad because he couldn't do anything about it. Hearing this, the nanny, trying to calm the boy down, says she feels good just because she's hugging him. And Louis says he'll grow up and protect her. Elin tells him not to worry because he'll be an adult very soon, and for now, he should enjoy his childhood. The prince looked at them and wondered if he should worry about these children. Evan understands all this and says that even if they grow up, everything will remain the same. He explains that abandoned members of the imperial family cannot protect anyone. Hearing this, the nanny asks why he says that. And Kosher says that the younger brother is worse than the older one. The girl asks the Duke why he says that. The prince explains that if they can be hurt, so can Eileen because she's their nanny. He then asks the boy if he plans to leave things as they are and asks if he'll try to change anything. The Duke turns to the boys and asks them to tell him directly who Eileen is to them. Evan says that he hated her, but now she has become important to him. The little prince turns to the nanny and apologizes for getting angry and explains that in fact he knew that she was doing this for their protection and that is why he only got more angry. Evan worriedly says there's nothing more he can do. He understands that only with a guardian can he be protected. At this point, Eileen realized how much he was going through. After all, the boy couldn't figure out how to open his heart to Eileen, whom he had previously hated so much. Louis hugs his nanny and tells her that she is his favorite person in the world. And that's why he wants Eileen to always be with them. Kosher understands all this and asks if they need his care. The boys confidently say that they really need his care and offer the gentleman to take care of them. Louis says he wants to grow up quickly, and Evan says that when they become adults, they'll pay off their debt to the prince. So they suggest the Duke not push it too hard. After all, when they become adults, they'll be able to help him too. At this time, the main character thought that the children had accepted Koshar, and this made her feel better. The prince hugs the girl and asks if she heard. Then he declares that it's wonderful to have 2 little knights with you. However, the lady objects and tells him not to hug her because there are children there. And at that moment, she thought about how strong his grip was. Kosher says he has to compete with the younger men. However, the girl claims he let her go because the princes were watching them. The Duke tells the girl to be quiet because he needs to win the competition with the kids. Louis says he wants to hug Eileen too. However, the prince objects and says that when he grows up, he will definitely hug her. At this point, the main character doesn't understand why everything is happening this way. However, she feels nothing but pleasure from it. When they arrived at the palace, the girl turned to the princes and said that they needed to discuss something. The nanny explains that she actually received an offer to move in. She also explains that this isn't the imperial palace and that it's a much nicer place than where they currently live. The boys are surprised to hear this, and Evan asks if this is the guardian's house. Eileen agrees with him, saying that this is the Duke's residence. She explains that since he's decided to become their guardian, living with him will be much safer. Louis wonders if even if they move, their home will always be here. The nanny agrees, saying they can always come back. The boys say that they agree because they need to be safe from all sorts of villains. Hearing this, Eileen hugs the boys and thanks them. And at that moment, she thinks her fears have been dispelled. Evan asks the nanny if they'll be a family now. She replies that everyone can be a family if they think so. Louis happily says that Eileen is the mother and her brother is the father. Hearing this, the prince laughed and then asked if it was okay. The main character explains to Louis and Evan that the Duke is brothers. At this time, the prince reflects on how they dared to plan to beat with a whip the woman who was his beloved while he was at an audience with the emperor. Aelin explains that if the Duke becomes their dad, then their family tree will not continue. The Duke reflects on the fact that the insolence of the Empress, who has climbed on the emperor's neck, is becoming greater and greater. The prince recalls a conversation with his father, who asked how he celebrated the anniversary of Vivian's death. Kosher thinks about his mother, who went mad and was imprisoned in a tower, committing suicide after being dethroned. Although he keeps his distance from Vieno, he always sides with her. This is likely his way of avoiding responsibility for his own guilt. The prince looks at his father and reflects on how he continues to resist and refuses to admit that he abandoned Vivian. His Majesty tells his son that the Empress is holding a lodgia in the palace and therefore suggests that they go there together. The prince understands that his father was curious about his beloved Eileen, and he realizes that, whatever the case, they were lucky the emperor went with him. After all, if the emperor hadn't been there, he would have torn off that knight's head, not his arm. The Duke realizes he's nearly lost his mind that day, and the only reason he's held on is because he ate the food Eileen cooked. And he senses there's more to come. Kosher looks at the girl and doesn't understand why he wants to touch her without reason. But suddenly the girl cries out that there are princes here and therefore suggests that they behave with dignity. Eileen realizes he won't just leave her alone, so she suggests he stop acting strangely and tells him to leave. She explains that if the children stay up late, he won't grow up. She insists the preparations are complete, and so he should quickly get in the carriage and leave. The girl informs the Duke that they will move as soon as they finish packing. She also thanks the gentleman for this evening because she understands that if it weren't for him, she would have gotten into trouble with the Empress. Kosher takes the girl's hand and kisses her. Then he tells her that this is the first time he'll be living with someone. He also tells her that he can't wait for the day when she moves in with him. While in prison, the Duke says he will leave the Appleton affair to him. Meanwhile, Michael inquires about the Marquis Lehman and his wife. The prince says that for now he will simply leave them because they are close to the Empress and they need to act gradually. Assistant Mikhail reports that he understands and will therefore act according to his instructions. He then asks how Eileen and the prince's preparations are progressing. Kosher replied that everything was over and that he was truly looking forward to them. And then he thought that he had never been so excited before. A week later, Eileen and the princes packed all their things to come to the Duke's castle. On the morning of their move, Mikhail informed Lady Harlan that he had arrived to pick them up. She assumed they had sent their luggage ahead of time, and now all that was left was to leave themselves. The maid Emma says that the prince didn't sleep all night, and they were so looking forward to this day. And Lewis even circled today on the calendar. The main character says that the first experience of leaving the Imperial Castle must be very exciting. Eileen recalls that much of Eileen's upbringing was spent at the Imperial Castle, and she knew that Kosher's domain was surrounded by a magical fog, which served as protection against outsiders. The girl recalls that in the original novel, this was all that was said about his castle, and therefore it was not guarded so closely. The maid marvelously tells her that they will live in Reuben's castle, and it seems like a dream to her. She also mentions that there is a huge fountain in its beautiful garden. Emma enthusiastically declares that the castle is very beautiful. Eileen reports that the entire castle is said to be made of crystal, and its enormous glass windows glitter in the light. However, of course, they won't find out until they arrive. Emma assures that this is definitely a beautiful place, since rumor has it that there is no more beautiful castle in the entire empire. Michael again invites the women and princes to get into the carriage. Sitting in the carriage, the assistant informs them that they are passing through a barrier and that there will likely be significant vibrations, so they shouldn't be alarmed. The protagonist sees a forest engulfed in fog. A few minutes later, Mikhail announces that they have arrived and can therefore exit the carriage. Suddenly, the main character sees darkness and a very old castle. Then, surprised, she asks if this is the Duke's castle. Place of crystal windows. They saw black towers. Emma says in surprise that this stone gargoyle with water splashing out of its mouth is a fountain. The surprised protagonist watched as a flock of crows descended upon the castle like a black cloud. And then she realized it was the devil's castle. The girl turns to the princes and tells them she thinks they've got the wrong address. The maid says, "Thank goodness, it's not Reuben Castle." Then she suggests they hurry to Reuben Castle. Mikhail looks at them in surprise and then says that this is Reuben Castle. At this point, time surprised, the girl approaches her assistant and asks him to tell her that this isn't the castle they're supposed to live in. However, he insists that this is Reuben's castle. The main character thought that she had been deceived and that she should have looked at the castle first before agreeing. The maid approaches Mikhail and tells him he's lying. However, the assistant insists it's Reuben Castle. The protagonist, however, can't understand how the prince plans to raise his children in such a place. This question alone makes her feel worse. She realizes it's like abandoning the children alone in the pitch darkness. At this point, the girl recalls that when she visited another apartment, she asked if there was mold in the building or if the drain was working properly. The maid said the girl was being too picky. Sitting near the castle, the girl thought that even the sky sympathized with her because it started to rain. At this time, the maid turns to the nanny and tells her that she will catch a cold if she gets wet and therefore suggests that she go inside. However, the main character ponders the fact that she doesn't know what will happen to their princes. Then she smiles and thinks that first she needs to find shelter from the rain. When they entered the castle, they were met by a man who said that he welcomed them to Reuben Castle. At this point, the girl and the maid thought it was a ghost and screamed about it. The girl said it was like something out of a horror movie, and the maid said they needed to return to the carriage. However, Mikhail calms them down and informs them that this is the butler. The man says his name is Draku Beloshu, and he is the butler of Reuben Castle. He then says they were frightened by lightning. At this point, Eileen looked at the butler and wondered about his pointed ears and gray skin. And he certainly fit the description of the minds who lived in the darkness of Varahan. The girl recalls that in the original novel, the continent was divided into 4 parts. The Empire of Richard, founded by dragons, the sacred Empire of Rubens with its Temple of Light and the 5 principalities of Suruis, living in harmony with nature, and Varakhan, home to the Minas, descendants of demons. Koshar, possessed by Elsia, cut off the head of King Main in order to start a war. Then he conquered Varakhan, making them his power. The main character understands that only the strongest becomes king, and when he was the demon king, it was the peak of Koshar's development. However, the girl remembers that this only happened halfway through the novel. She thinks it should only happen 3 years from now, and she doesn't understand why mine is already here. At this time, the maid asks the nanny whether the gentleman is a man. The main character explains that she thinks he is from Varakhan and that this is the place where the Manus live. Emma was surprised to hear this and asked where mine came from. Nanny replied that she didn't know either and suggested they calm down first. However, the maid insisted it was a disaster. Mikhail calms them down and tells them that it's normal because they were scared when they saw Maine for the first time. The butler says there's no need to apologize because he understands everything. And at that moment, the main character realized how scared she was. Meanwhile, the boys were exploring the castle, and Lewis asked why the statue had 3 heads. Evan replied that he thought the sculptor was very sleepy when he created it. Mikhail says that the butler Draku will show them the castle and then says that he must leave. Eileen suggests that the assistant stay longer and asks where the swindler is and when he will return. Mikhail replied that they were expecting him tomorrow morning. Then he said he had to go, as he still had things to do. At that moment, the girl thought he looked like a middleman who had a hand in a fraudulent deal. And she couldn't understand how he could leave so quickly. The butler addresses the guests and invites them to follow him. He then announces that he will show them the castle. After these words, he collapses. The astonished ladies ask if he is all right. The butler apologizes and explains that he's not feeling well. However, he'll try to show them everything. Lewis turns to the butler and says that if he's sick, he shouldn't do this. Evan asks if he's really okay. Hearing this, Draku smiles and then asks if they are worried about him. Then he says that their princes have noble hearts. Then he spat out a red liquid. At this point, the main character thought she'd like to pass out too. The maid faints. The girl says, "I'm just dreaming, so let them wake her up." The surprised little gentleman turns to Eileen and insists that the man isn't moving. The nanny turns to Lewis and tells him that he shouldn't poke a sick person like that. Evan agrees with the nanny and says it's better to finish him off without leaving a trace. Hearing this, the girl is surprised and asks why he says that. The young gentleman claims that this is what his guardian said. As a tem, he then explains that if a good person is sick, it's best to finish them off and end their suffering. But if a bad person is sick, it's best to make sure they don't die for as long as possible. Evan asks the girl if this is wrong. However, Eileen doesn't understand what kind of person this count is and what he's teaching the children. Suddenly, another mind addresses them, and the main character thought that there could be quite a few of them here. This time, however, mine turned out to be a woman. Then, alone, she lifted the butler and slung him over her shoulder. Seeing this, the main character realized that she was no longer surprised by anything. And Louis said that this woman was very strong, and that surprised him. Mine informs that she is the head maid of this castle, and her name is Eshitra. Then she turns to the lady and says that she is probably Eileen Harlan. The protagonist replies that it is she. The maid says that since the butler isn't in the best condition right now, she'll have to show them around the castle. Then she orders them to follow her. She glanced at Emma and thought about how she couldn't leave her here, then pointed at the maid and said that she had come here with them and lost consciousness. They needed to call someone for help, so they were staying here. Ashitra insists she'll handle it. Then she slings Emma over her other shoulder and announces she's ready to go. At this time, the main character thought that it was still possible to escape from here. As they walked down the corridor, the princess noticed that the curtains were closing by themselves. The head maid then informed her that it was magic. Hearing this, the girl realized she was a mage, but she couldn't understand why all the windows were curtained. Evan announces that he too wants to learn magic. Eshitra insists that magic is a matter of talent and, looking at the princes, says she thinks they can do it. Eileen thought that the head maid knew something about these twins. Arriving on the second floor, Eshitra announces their arrival. Then she explains that Prince Louis's room is to the left and Prince Evan's room is to the right of Lady Emma's room. Louis looked at the rooms in surprise and said that only the color of the bed was different. Evan, surprised, asked if he and his brother would have separate rooms. The senior maid says that if they don't like it, they can live together. And then she tells them to say so and not be shy. Louis says he wants his own room. However, Evan asks if he can really sleep alone, as he's afraid. Louis insists he's not afraid because he'll be an adult soon. At this point, the main character sighed with relief and thought how glad she was that at least the children's rooms looked okay. Then she asked where her room was. The head maid announces that Lady Harlan will be staying on the third floor. She also says that she will place Lady Emma in her room. At this point, the main character thought about how she'd be living on the third floor, and therefore thought it was a good idea. She also considered that if she didn't agree to go, she'd be forced to take the place on her other shoulder. Ashitra left Emma in her room. Then she went up to the third floor and said, "Miss Eileen, you can take the room on the right." At that moment, the protagonist realized there were only 2 rooms on this floor. Standing by the door, the girl thanks the head maid for seeing her out. Then she says she thinks the butler is about to bleed to death. Ishitra says she's already leaving, but suddenly turns to the girl and asks her to wait. Hearing this, the protagonist thinks something is wrong, and it only makes her more afraid. The maid reports that the Duke asked her to convey that she is welcome to his room at any time of the day or night. Eileen is also welcome to invite him to hers. Ashitra says that's all she had to say and insists that tomorrow she'll introduce her to the castle staff and show her all the other places. She then suggests the girl rest. Entering her room, the main character thought that she was very tired and wanted to go home. That evening, Louis turns to Eileen and tells her he's very sleepy. He also wants to play a little more and then go to bed. The nanny asks Louis if he can really sleep alone. Then she tells him that if he goes to bed early, he'll grow up. Meanwhile, Evan turns to his brother and tells him that if he's scared, he shouldn't come to him. Louis replies that he won't come to him because he's brave. And then he falls asleep in a second. Eileen kissed the boy on the cheek and then wished him good night. The nanny turns to Evan and asks if he'll go to bed too. She then says that if anything happens, he can wake Emma. The prince suggests he suspects she might already be dead. Hearing this, the girl smiled and said she was simply very tired. Then she suggested to the prince that if he was scared, he could come see her. But to do so, he'd have to climb the stairs to the third floor, as her room was on the right. Evan agrees with the girl and then asks if she'll hug him. At this point, the nanny realizes she's listened to her and asks what he said. However, the prince replies that he didn't say anything and says he's going to sleep, so he suggests she leave. At this point, Eileen realized what he had said, and then she kissed him on the cheek and wished him good night, calling him her prince. The boy wished her the same, and at this point, the girl thought he was cute. After this, the main character went out into the hallway, and she thought about how she didn't know where the cafeteria was. However, she felt her throat was very dry. Walking down the hallway, she glanced into the corner and thought there was someone there. Then she came closer and saw the butler holding a glass of red liquid. And then the girl realized she too was about to pass out. When the girl opened her eyes and saw the prince, she realized she clearly remembered fainting and wondered if it was a dream. After all, she realized she hadn't dreamed anything other than a supermarket in a long time. And so she thought it was all a dream. Eileen looked at the prince's chest and thought that although it was a dream, she could still see the muscles clearly. The girl looks at the prince and smiles and then says that he is crazy handsome. The main character grabs the Duke by the cheeks and, screaming, calls him a fraud. Then she asks how he could trick them into moving to such a place. Eileen turns to the prince and asks if he really thought she'd forgive him just because he took off her shirt in her sleep. She tugs at his cheeks again and tells him it's unfair and he's a damn cheater. The butler looked at the lady in surprise and then suggested she calm down. Hearing this, the girl asked why Draku was in her dream. However, he insisted it wasn't a dream and said it was him, and it would be best if she removed her hand from the prince. Kosher turns to the girl and then asks if his beauty slept well. At that moment, Eileen realized it wasn't a dream. She then looked at the Duke's flushed cheeks and greeted him. The prince asked why she called him that. Then he insisted that they were lovers, and she should call him by his given name. The girl agrees and says, Mr. Koshar. However, the prince objects and suggests she speak by her first name without the master's name. At this point, the girl doesn't understand what to do and thinks she's already buried herself. Kosher asks what happened anyway. Then he turns to the butler and claims he asked him to prepare everything for his meeting with his beloved. Dragu replies that they have prepared. However, the prince clarifies whether they prepared in a human or a Manian manner. The butler replies that they have prepared everything in the main style. The main character is surprised to hear this. Then she asks if they've also decorated the garden for their arrival. Dragu replies that they've tried. And the lady asks, what about the black skulls on the stairs? The head butler explains that for them, red, black, and purple are the most beautiful colors. And the water in the fountain is a healthy herbal drink. The statues of the animals popular in Vericon were commissioned by an artisan. Then he asks if they aren't beautiful. At this time, the girl thought that the Mina's standards of beauty were fundamentally different from those of humans. The nanny wonders who did the interior design of their rooms with the children, since they were clearly not done to their standards. Draku replied that all these rooms were furnished according to the owner's orders, and he personally oversaw the process. Then the girl realized that's why everything was fine with these rooms. Kosher turns to the butler and says that, as he sees it, his beloved and children are not Minas. He then asserts that this isn't what he had in mind, making the palace habitable. At this point, Draku realized it was all his fault, and he felt sincere and sorry. Then he asked Lady Harlan for forgiveness. Eileen says she understands because it's all about cultural differences. And at that moment, she thought it was impossible to live here. The girl suddenly remembered seeing Draco with a glass containing red liquid and thought about how she fainted because of it. Then she reports that she recently saw him vomit blood. The butler asks the girl if he scared her then, and then explains that it was a misunderstanding, as he wasn't vomiting blood at all. And it wasn't blood, but a porridge, a drink made from crushed plants. The nanny asks if she can compare it to vegetable juice. He explains that he's a vegetarian. Then he puts the bottle to his face and says that the juice is delicious. After all, he'd been eating only meat for a long time, but after trying vegetables, his diet completely changed. Eileen says she's heard that Minas eat only meat, and then asks if he can eat only vegetables. As she understands, that's not the best option. Draku replies that if he were in Vericon, he would be able to cope due to the dark energy. However, here it continues to reject vegetarian food. Hearing this, the prince offers him some meat to eat. At this point, the girl says it's good because it wasn't blood. However, the butler asks what he should do if it doesn't taste good. At this point, Eileen thought she needed to find out later why the Minas were living with Koshar. Then she turned to the prince and informed him that she was very tired and would therefore go to her room to sleep. Suddenly, the prince grabs her hand and then asks where she went if she was so tired. Kosher claims this is his lover's bedroom, and then he lays her down on the bed. At this point, the butler announces that he's leaving, realizing he doesn't want to disturb them. Lying in bed, the girl looks at the prince and thinks about how she'll spend her hot night. She knows he's handsome and has a perfect body, but she wonders if this isn't too drastic. However, those chest muscles are driving her crazy. The prince turns to the girl and, surprised, tells her that she has a nosebleed. Eileen explains it's because she's really tired today. Then, with a squeal, she says she swears it's not his chest muscles at all. Kosher asks the girl to bow her head, then takes a handkerchief and wipes her nose. At this point, the girl thinks how embarrassing this makes her. Then she apologizes for criticizing him. The main character explains that she thought it was a dream because the interior was too creepy. The Count says he understands her and therefore offers to change everything to suit her tastes. Hearing this, the girl is surprised and asks if she can really do that. The prince replies that she can do whatever she wants, since she is his beloved. Elin replies that she doesn't mind and says that her tension has eased, which is why she feels sleepy. At this point, the prince says that in return, she owes him a favor. However, the girl didn't hear any more because she fell asleep. The next morning, Eileen woke up screaming, saying she didn't understand why she'd fallen asleep in Koshar's room, and she didn't understand where he'd gone or why. The main character realizes she needs to go back to her room first. When she gets there, she stands near the door and thinks about how crazy this could make her go. She doesn't understand what to do here anymore. Then she convinces herself she didn't do anything wrong. The girl remembers that the prince said something, but she can't remember it. Suddenly, the nanny heard someone knocking on her door. And then she realized it was Koshar, and she couldn't meet him so soon after what had happened. When the lady opened the door, she saw Ishitra, who said that she first went to the master's bedroom, but he was not there, and so she came here. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand how she knows she slept with Koshar. Then she asks where the prince is. The headmaid replies that he's gone to the training grounds, and the girl says she understands since her bunny is so cool. And then she thinks about how she has said too much. And then she asks if the princes are still asleep. Ashitra informs her that her maid is with the prince now, and therefore invites her to go down to them together. The princes meet them in the hallway, and Louis hugs the nanny. The lady asks if they slept well. Louis replies that he was scared because he woke up alone this morning, but everything is fine. Evan says nothing bothered him. But when he knocked on the door, it opened right away. At that moment, the nanny thought that perhaps he wanted to visit Louis too. Then she suggests the boys go get something to eat. Ashitra announces that she'll take them there, and the boys look at Maina and think, "This is that strong woman." She turns to them and suggests they call her Ashitra. Louis resolutely takes her hand. At this point, the main character thinks the princes aren't afraid of her at all. Evan asks the nanny if the woman is a mage. Hearing this, she thinks he has an interest in magic. Then she remembers that both twins grew up to be powerful mages, but only Evan could fully control it. And at this time, the main character thought that she needed to find a person who would teach them magic, and the maid Emma apologizes for yesterday. Eileen says it's nothing serious and understands her fear, and then it occurred to her that she too had actually fainted. The maid says she was probably overly sensitive, since she'll be working with them. Nanny says she understands and suggests she not worry so much. Eileen looked around the room and thought about how the cafeteria still looked like a horror movie set. And she wondered if the food would be decent in a cafeteria that looked like that. The head maid announces that the food has been served, and looking at the table with food, the girl thought that it looked appetizing. Ashitra informs that the chef here is from the Richard Empire, and therefore she should like it. When the nanny tried the dish, she said that it looked a little rough, but tasted good. And through the open door, she saw people watching her intently, and she couldn't figure out who they were. Then she realized there were both citizens of the Empire and mains here. The servants watched the nanny and the princes closely, and the boys seemed very cute to them. Suddenly, the main character heard rumors of her being the prince's lover. Then she looked their way, and seeing her gaze, they apologized. And then the girl thought about how they hadn't done anything, and they looked as if they were afraid of her. Eileen asks the head maid if Koshar will be coming for breakfast. Ashitra explains that the master hardly eats anything, and therefore doesn't often come into the dining room. The main character assumes he probably prefers to eat separately. However, the maid says he most likely doesn't like to eat at all. Hearing this, the lady was surprised, finding it odd since he always ate a lot when he was with her. Then she informed him that the food tasted fine, and if he were so picky about food, he wouldn't have eaten what she cooked. The nanny turns to the children and asks if they like the food. Louis replies that everyone here is so kind and there are so many delicious things, and then says that he likes Ellen the most because her food is the most delicious. At this time, the main character thought that perhaps moving had been a good idea after all. Suddenly, Kosher appeared, stroking the boy's head and saying that the little one was doing a good job. Then he asked Louis if he liked it there. Seeing the prince, the lady says that she is glad to see him, and the boy says that Eileen's beloved has arrived. At this point, the main character realized that none of the servants were going to bring food to Koshar. Then she asked the master if he would like to eat. The count says he's just come to see her. However, she asks if he'll really eat. He replies that he's not hungry. Meanwhile, the girl ponders whether he's not eating because he doesn't want to, or whether he's not eating because it irritates him. However, she can't believe he's not eating anything. Eileen gets up from the table and screams that this won't do. Then she asks if she can borrow the kitchen. The head maid escorted the girl in, and when the girl arrived there, she thought that it was good that there was an ordinary kitchen here. Seeing the head maid, the chef asks what happened and who is next to her. Ashitra explains that this is the master's beloved Lady Eileen Harlan. The cook says it's a great honor to meet her. He then reveals that he's the castle's head chef and his name is Vavito. Then he asks if there might be something wrong with the food. The main character objects, saying that's not true at all and that she enjoyed everything with the princes. She then explains that she's actually here because Koshar isn't eating, and that's why she wants to cook him something. Vavito clarifies whether she's talking about the master and then explains that he hasn't eaten anything for almost 3 months. Hearing this, the protagonist is surprised. After all, she thought he was trying hard, but it turns out he's starving to death. And then she remembers that she's heard that members of the royal family can go without food for long periods, but not that long. Eileen asks the chef if she can use his kitchen. He agrees, and then she tells Ishitra to fetch the spice packet from her room. And then she thinks that if the prince isn't ill, he should eat a hearty, meaty meal. When the girl prepared the dish, the chef was surprised to see it, as it smelled sweet and was unlike anything he'd ever experienced before, as well as looked beautiful. He then asked what the dish was called. Eileen explains that it's bulgogi. It's a fried meat dish with sweet and savory fillings. The chef says he hopes the owner will eat what she's made. At this point, the main character thought about how not only Ashitra, but also Vivito and everyone else was worried about Koshar. Guys, it's time, she thought. The prince would like this food. When the nanny brought the dish into the dining room, she turned to the prince and told him he should eat well, reminding him that he was setting an example for the children. Everyone looked on in surprise to see if the prince was eating or not. He tried one piece, and the count said the lady surprises him every time. He then said the taste is moderately salty and slightly sweet, and so soft it seems to melt in his mouth. Kashar reports that he falls in love with the taste all over again, every time he touches it to the tip of his tongue. The twins heard this and announced that they, too, were hungry. At this point, the maid announced that she had already prepared portions for the princes. Louis tried a little and raved that the meat was tender and sweet. Evan said it had a pleasantly salty, sweet flavor. The prince turns to the girl and tells her that she cooked deliciously and that it's priceless to him. At that moment, she thinks she doesn't understand why she's suddenly so proud of herself. She wonders what else she should cook, anything. At this point, all the servants were amazed to see their master had eaten everything, and they thought it must have been a miracle. Performed by the future mistress, they say there's nothing their master's beloved can't do. The servants were surprised because the master was able to taste it, and one of the maids said that this was the first time she had seen the master eat everything. Hearing this, the girl was surprised because she did not know that Koshar could not feel taste. Suddenly, Kosher says that's enough. He then turns to the nanny and informs her that the children have finished eating and invites them to play in their room. Then he leaves. The main character was surprised because she did not understand what had suddenly happened and why he had left the dining room so suddenly. The butler turns to Lady Harleen and tells her that there is something she should know. As the lady lay in bed, she pondered the prince's loss of taste. She realized that at some point he had lost his sense of taste. And now she understood that that was why he didn't eat. The girl doesn't understand why he says her food is delicious and what's so special about it. Since the prince even described the taste, she thought it was all just an act. Eileen ponders the condition that she must cook for him. She doesn't understand why she feels so sad. Suddenly, she heard someone knocking on her door. She wondered if it might be the children or the head maid. When the girl opened the door, She saw Koshar and was surprised. Then she asked what had happened. The prince explains that he has come to ask her out on a date. Then he asks if he can distract her for a moment. Eileen agrees to go with him and then asks where they're going. He replies that he wants to show her the most normal part of the castle. Hearing this, the main character thought that there were other normal places in this castle besides her and the twins' rooms. A few minutes later, they found themselves in a garden filled with yellow flowers. Upon seeing these flowers, the girl said they were called moon pears. Upon hearing this, the prince, surprised, asks how she knows these flowers. The lady explains that she simply heard their name. And then it occurred to her that these flowers were Vivian's favorite. The main character recalls that before the Empress went mad, the entire palace was strewn with moon pierces. She loved them so much. And now she understands that this must have had such an impact on the prince. And when Kosher locked the main character away, he gave her a bouquet of these flowers. The lady knows that only the buds are visible during the day, and the flowers themselves bloom at night. Eileen looks at the flowers and says they're very beautiful. Then she asks if he brought her here to show her them. The gentleman says he wanted to console her a little. At this time, the girl thought that he seemed to notice that she was sad, and therefore hoped that when he praised her food, he was not lying. The nanny looks at the prince and then says that she wants to ask him something, and she wonders if it is true that he has no sense of taste. Kosher replies that it's true. Eileen insists that means he's been lying all this time. However, the gentleman counters, saying he only fully appreciates the taste of her food. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand how this can be and asks about it. The prince explains that he doesn't understand it either, and it's strange to him, but all he can taste is the food the nanny prepared. And then Kosher swears to her by this pattern and takes off his shirt and says that this is a vow of truth. The protagonist realizes that this is an ancient sign, sealed between Koshar and the emperor, and it's a leash that's at stake, and their lives are at stake. The prince reveals that he suffers from mania and has been taking poison to maintain his sanity. At this time, the girl thought that he was talking about alubi berries. Kosher explains that this poison is from the lands of the Mina, and that's why he can maintain his sanity, because eating it gradually takes away his senses. Gertzak explains that he's unable to feel his 5 primary senses, which is why he can't feel well. At this point, the girl realized she knew the poison caused severe headaches. However, she had no idea where these berries came from or their ability to deprive a person of these primary senses. The main character realizes it's even worse than it was in the book. Then Koshar says it's the first taste he's had in 3 years. And that's why he's grateful to her. He cuddles up to her and says he feels safer when she's around. Then the girl hugs him and says that she understands because he had a very difficult time. And the prince reports that he can only smell blood and taste rot. Eileen said she would continue to try to help him. And then she thought that if he could taste her food, perhaps one day he would be able to taste others. The girl understands that she will not be able to remove the curse because she is not the main character, but she will still try to help him. When the lady noticed the prince's gaze, she said the night air was very cold, so she would go to her room. Then she suggested he get dressed. The surprised prince asked if she didn't like it when he took his clothes off. Eileen insisted he would catch a cold and told him to get dressed quickly. The heroine thought she was shy, and the dark night must hide her face. Then the prince offered to escort her home. When they reached the door, Eileen bid the prince good night. However, Kosher asks why she's going to this room and not his. She explains that it's her room. However, he objects and says they've decided to sleep together from today. Hearing this, the girl remembered that he had set her conditions. Then the prince said he understood her and that it might be unpleasant for her. However, the lady objects, saying she didn't answer him back then. And the prince says he understands, as sleeping together in a contractual relationship might not be pleasant. Kosher says he's sorry because it seems his headache and pain go away when she's around. And then the girl thinks about the headache being a magic word that makes it weaker. Then she agrees to stay with him until he falls asleep. But when she gets to his room, she immediately lies down on the bed and falls asleep. The next day, walking down the corridor, the main character does not understand why the mines are avoiding her. Suddenly, she saw Eshitra and asked if she'd seen the butler. The maid replied that if she was talking about Draca, he was in the hallway behind her. Eileen thanked the maid. However, Ashitra wondered why she needed Master Draku. The lady explained that she had something to tell him. A few minutes later, she saw the butler holding a bottle of red liquid. When he saw her, he said there was nothing better than vegetable juice. The main character greeted Draka and said she was glad she'd finally found him. The surprised butler asked what was wrong. The girl then revealed she had something she'd really like to give him. The lady asks him if he likes spicy vegetarian food and then reveals that she brought a protein drink and explains that vegetables are good. And she understands that they are not suitable for the Maid body, and so she thought that this could replace meat, and if he likes it, she will tell him how to cook it. Draku thanks the lady for her concern and then drinks a little. The butler tasted a little and reported that she brought very tasty food. He said it was the first time he'd tasted something so savory, and his body didn't reject it, and he couldn't understand how that was possible. At this time, the main character thought that it was good that there were such organic products and said that she didn't know that he would like it so much, and next time she would bring more. The surprised butler asks if she is sure she can give him something so valuable. The girl says she'll tell him how to cook it, and he says he doesn't know how to repay her. The protagonist tells him she wants to ask him for a favor. Draku suggests she say what she wants, as he'll do everything in his power. Eileen says she needs them to change the castle with her. Then she explains that she saw the twins playing with monster figurines. The girl says that her princes are still very young, and it will be difficult for them to adapt to society when they return to the Imperial Palace. Draku says he understands. After all, it's Richard, and people live there. Then he asks what needs to change. Lady says she's made a deal with him, so now all she has to do is talk to Koshar. He offers to escort the girl and informs her that the prince is expected in his office. At this point, the lady says that this needs to be sorted out as quickly as possible, and so she thanks the butler. Eileen asks the butler how he ended up in Richard and says that she hasn't heard anything about it since he is a secretive person, and she doesn't know much about Koshar at all. Draku says she probably didn't expect to see mines in Richard. Then she explains that they served the Duke even before the castle was built. At this point, the lady reflected on how they had been connected to Koshar even before he took possession of the duchy. And then she asked if he had known him since the war. Draku tells him that she's guessing correctly. Then he explains that they were mercenaries for the allied countries. Vladis's allies was stationed near Varicon. There they first met as enemies. However, they did not dare confront him. The master butler reports that from that day on, they were impressed by his strength and decided to follow him as their master. But it wasn't just the Minas and other prisoners of war who followed him, even the orphans. He also says that everyone who works in this castle is connected to the war. Draku reports that they were all pardoned by Mr. Koshar. Hearing this, Eileen thought about how it happened when young Koshar was fighting in the war, having been deposed by the crown prince. And now she understood why they all wanted to help him. However, she thought he was already preparing to become the Mind King. After all, she understood that there was only one reason the prince became the Mind King: to obtain LCS, and that was what started the Continental War. Standing in front of the master's door, the girl thought that this massacre on the continent must be prevented. Entering the office, Koshar asks the girl if she slept well and then reminds her that she forgot about him. Eileen looked at the prince and thought that he was dazzling early in the morning. Koshar asks the lady why she came and assumes that she wanted to see him. The girl explains that he said she can change the castle's interior however she wishes. Then she asks if that's still true. The prince explains that this was a mistake on his part and therefore suggests that she not worry about the costs and do everything as she wishes. Hearing this, the lady thought she could now discuss the matter in more detail. Then she suggested calling an interior designer and suggested she choose one herself. However, the prince objects and says that he can find out about it himself. Eileen says she was the one who suggested redecorating the room and therefore wanted to take on the task herself. And then she thought about bringing Princess Frigga. The protagonist realizes she needs to meet with the head of Elvatoria in person, as her personality differs from Princess Laksha's. She understands that Princess Frigga is the #1 candidate to become Koshar's girlfriend. Eileen ponders the need to find the right woman for him before he falls in love with the main character and starts a continental war. Meanwhile, she feels as if something is holding her back. She doesn't understand why she feels anxious when everything is going so well. The prince asks Eileen how she wants to find him. She replies that she'll go to Guild Street and look for him. Hearing this, the prince invites her there on a date and asks if she'll agree. However, the girl objects, explaining that she wants to go there herself and find someone. She also says she thinks it would be good if he sent someone with her. Kosher gives her the medallion and offers it to her. At that moment, the girl thought, she doesn't understand why, but she feels like she's seen it somewhere before. The prince informs her that it's the key to the fog barrier and says she won't be able to take Mikhail with her forever. At this time, the main character thought that this was a real magic stone, which is a mineral capable of storing magic within itself. Eileen thought that even if she sold all the gifts Kosher had sent her when they lived in the cold palace, it would still not be enough to buy one such stone. The prince says he's sad that she's worried about something like this and claims they've even shared a bed before. However, the girl offers nothing that could be misinterpreted. Kosher invites her to wear it with pleasure and never take it off. The Duke places the locket around his mistress's neck and then tells her to allow him to plan her exit. At this point, the girl thought about the sparkling gemstone around her neck and that it was the only piece of jewelry that would last a lifetime. The next day, arriving at the training ground, Eileen asks the prince why they've come there. He explains that before she leaves, she needs to decide something. A large man approaches the lady and asks if she is, by any chance, the gentleman's lover. The girl replies that she is, and at that moment, she thinks about how large he is and apparently has giant blood in him. Mine says he respects her and that she must be very strong since the gentleman fell in love with her. А затем он обращается к принцу. He says that a woman who is stronger than him is every man's ideal. Kosher agrees with him and says he's right, as his heart leaps just at the thought of a woman dominating him. Maid says the fact that she's equal to her master is admirable. Hearing this, the girl thought that the Minus worship strength and they really think that she's subjugated Kosher and made him her boyfriend. The prince invites the girl to choose an escort from among them and explains that from now on he will be responsible for her trips. One after another, the giants offer the girl a choice, and they cry out for her to give them a chance. And then the girl thought she couldn't tell if they wanted to accompany her or kill her. Eileen wondered if there was someone less conspicuous among them. Suddenly, she saw a boy and remembered that his name was Ludvion. The spiritual swordsman Ludvion in the original betrayed Koshar. Ludvion stands up for Mikhail and swears allegiance to him when he learns that Koshar has kidnapped Elsia. The main character recalls that he is also special because he is a half-elf and can communicate with spirits. He was very fond of Elsia because she taught him how to control spirits. However, he remained her shadow for the rest of his life because he never had the courage to confess his feelings. And the lady understands that, in reality, in comparison with Kosher, Ludvion is a less valuable character. However, he doesn't yet know how to control spirits, and he's like a hidden gem. Meanwhile, the principal asks Eileen if she's chosen a knight to accompany her. The girl replies that she has, pointing to the man. Hearing this, the Maid scream, calling him a weakling and thinking he won't be able to protect the Duke's beloved. The largest Mina, screaming, insists that a knight for the lady should be at least his size, and then asks if that's true. They claim they're stronger than him, and therefore suggest the lady try again. Eileen explains that if she rides to the carriage with either of them, she simply won't be able to bear it and will fall apart. Then she says that this guy is also a knight, and so she believes that as long as he has a sword, he will defend her with dignity. The prince turns to Ludvion and asks if he can entrust him with escorting his beloved. Hearing this, the knight kneels and says that if he entrusts this to him, he will lay down his life for her protection. And at that moment, the protagonist thought about how she just wants to get out to the city, but she feels like she's going to war. Eileen approaches the knight and expresses her pleasure at meeting him. It occurred to her that she could borrow a talent from the future for a while. Meanwhile, Kosher says that if she cheats on him, she'll be screwed. Hearing this, the girl doesn't understand what he's talking about. The next morning, the boys ask Eileen if she can take them with her. The main character explains that she'll take them with her next time, as today she's going on business, not for fun. Lewis suggests the nanny be careful. Hey, the girl thanks them for their understanding and informs them that she'll buy them gifts. Hearing this, the guys were very happy, and the girl invites them to have a good time without her. Suddenly, the prince approaches her from behind and asks if she'll buy him something. Seeing him, the girl is surprised and wonders why he's been touching her so often. She remembers that he started doing this after they went flower gazing. However, she can't get used to it. Eileen announces that she'll prepare dinner and invites the prince to wait for her. He asks, surprised, if she'll be back before dark. Then he kisses her on the cheek. At this time, the main character didn't understand what had happened to her because she saw herself in a white dress on a green meadow, children playing, and they were calling the prince Daddy. And after these visions, the girl realized she needed to come to her senses. Sitting in the carriage, Eileen thought that she felt like she had lost her mind again. Ludvion asks the lady if she's all right. Hearing this, the girl realizes she's been so lost in thought about Koshar that she didn't even notice she found herself in the carriage. The main character thought she'd had enough of this delusion, and she realized it wasn't starting to feel like an illness anymore. But she couldn't get the thought out of her head. Why did he kiss her then? And not even her hair, but her cheek. It made her uneasy because so many people were looking at them. The girl reflects on how the prince was so determined to pretend that even he had to kiss her on the cheek. The knight asks the girl if she's uncomfortable. He can ride on horseback. Hearing this, Eileen objects and says that it is probably because she is already crazy about the prince. Ludvion explained that he understood, as they were in a relationship and therefore had a close bond. Upon hearing this, the girl smiled and said she'd probably agree with him. The main character felt awkward because it was the first time she was alone with someone other than the twins and Koshar. The girl thought that if Koshar resembled a beast man, then he was more of a sad, handsome man. She understood that the knight was handsome, as the book said, but she suspected that Koshar was much, much better. Eileen thought she was going crazy because she couldn't understand why she thought about the prince so often. She reasoned that she should now be looking for a new lover for him and therefore needed to come to her senses and gather her thoughts to focus. At this time, the knight turns to the lady and asks why she chose him. The girl explains that he's a knight. Ludvion claims there are those better than him. The lady explains that his mere presence there already means he's a worthy knight. And just because he's not as huge doesn't mean he's any less remarkable. And so she doesn't think he's inferior to the other knights in any way. The main character turns to Sir Ludvion and asks him to promise her that he will not tell Koshar where they went today. The knight says he won't say anything, then tells the girl he has information she needs to know. He explains that no one will tell her but him,